My shed is right full of junk, ready to be upcycled. Come on in and see what I'm creating. I've got some really great upcycles today, and I hope you're going to find some inspiration. The first thing that I'm going to be working on is this vase that I found at the thrift store. It was broken. Somebody had glued it back together. It doesn't look very good right now, but wait until I'm finished with it because I'm going to do a painting technique that's going to make this look like an old ceramic vase. Went to the hardware store and I bought a little container of spackling. This is really great for smoothing out holes or cracks and things. They often use it for drywall, but it's great for DIY projects like this. I'm putting on a pair of gloves and I'm going to just smear it. There's no really way of doing this properly. It can get messy. We just want to fill in all those little cracks or holes and make more of a smooth surface. It's also going to make that vase stronger in case there wasn't enough glue in places, and it's going to bond it all together. So I'm just going to get messy here and I'm going to smear it all over this vase right down to the bottom. And I'm going to be creating a little bit of texture with it too. And it doesn't have to be completely uniform over the whole vase. You can have places that are thicker in some places and thinner in others. Don't worry about it. We just want to get it covered. And the nice thing about this product also is it's pink, but as it dries, it turns white. So then you know that it's ready to put on a second coat. This is all white now, and you can see the beautiful texture that I'm starting to create. And I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna put on another thicker layer. And I'm gonna have this one really not uniform at all. I'm going to have bumps and ridges and lots of texture in it. You can find this product at any hardware store, and you can also find it on Amazon. I'll put the link down below in the description. Once I have this vase completely covered, I'm going to go in with my gloved hands and just pat it up and down, and it's giving it a stippled look. Now we're going to wait for that pink hue of the spackling to turn white. And once it's completely dry, I'm going to go in with my hands and I'm just going to knock off any high edges of that spackling on the vase. And then we're ready to go on to the next step. And this next step is the magic potion to making this look like an old vessel or an old ceramic vase. I've got some homemade chalk paint and I'm just going to sprinkle in some dirt. This is a little bit of sand. There's pebbles. I just got this out of my garden and I'm going to incorporate it into this chalk paint. It's a little bit thick. I might add a little bit of water to it so it spreads a little bit easy. But now we're going to paint on top of this spackling. This is going to create even more texture and it's going to stick to that spackling really well. I'm going to go over that whole base, patting up and down, and you don't have to even get it all covered. You can have pieces that don't have any paint and some that do, but can you see this gorgeous texture that it's making? I just love this technique, and you can take an ugly old vase that you found at the thrift store and upcycle it into something that's modern looking and will suit your home decor better on a budget. Once that paint has dried, I'm going to go back in with that dirt and just rub it in. It's going to fill in all those little nooks and crannies and it's going to give that aged look. And I'm just going to rub it right in until I'm happy with the desired effect. And if you don't have any dirt handy, you can always use some cinnamon. That creates a really great color too. Once it was all finished, I sprayed it up with my polyacrylic sealer and I used a matte finish. And this is what I created from that ugly vase that was broken and somebody had tried to glue together. And I've upcycled it into a modern piece of home decor on a budget. Next upcycle, I found this little wooden box. It's been homemade. Somebody's made it, put a lot of love into it, but it needs some TLC. I'm not going to change it much, and I'm actually not even going to paint it because I love the color of it, but it does need to have some decoupaged paper in the base of it. It looks like maybe the stain has not been blended in very well in the bottom. So I'm just going to measure out a piece of my scrapbooking paper. I'm going to cut it to the size that I need, and then I'm going to use my Mod Podge mat and I'm going to glue it to the bottom of this little box. These little trinket boxes are really easy to find at the thrift store. I see them quite often and they're a great way to upcycle for gifts or for Christmas presents. I'm just going to use my Mod Podge mat. I'm going to put a light coat on the bottom of that box and then just lay that scrapbooking paper on top of it. You don't want to put too much Mod Podge down. If you do, it's going to have a tendency to bubble and wrinkle. You don't need very much, just a light coat. And then I'm just going to press it down, make sure that it's stuck really well, get any bubbles and wrinkles out of it, and then I'm going to go back in with just a very light coat of that Mod Podge to seal it all up. I think the top needed a handle. I went into my stash and I found this beautiful black handle, and I had some old screws, and I'm just going to screw it to the top of this box. Thrifting for gifts isn't just budget friendly. It's about finding unique treasures with heart. Gift more for less, because thoughtful doesn't have to mean expensive. And I've taken this little box, added a handle, put a little piece of decoupage scrapbooking paper in the bottom, and it's made a little cute catch-all box that I think would be perfect to re-gift for somebody. Next thrift store find is this little riser or tray. $2.49, and somebody spent a lot of time making this little beautiful project. I am not going to do anything to it because I love it just the way that it is. I'm going to set it up at my kitchen sink, and it's going to be a great place to keep my dish soap, and I have a little pottery dish, and I'm going to keep my scrubber brush in it. $2.50. You bet. This is an upcycle that anybody can do. It is so simple, and there are things that you can find at the thrift store all the time. This is just a candle riser. It was $1.99 and a piece off of a light fixture. And it was $2.99. And we're going to incorporate these two pieces together. The first thing that I'm going to do is clean everything up. These little glass pieces were really dusty and dirty, so I'm using my Windex and a paper towel, and I'm going to clean it all up. And then we're going to take it apart. And this was really easy to take apart. It just had little tabs, and I just used a butter knife and just really carefully just opened those up, and then those glass panels came right out. I'm going to be really careful because they're not fragile, but I don't want to break any after I've gone this far on the project. Once I have them all taken out, I'm going to take this outside, and I'm going to spray the base and this light fixture this beautiful gold. These came out absolutely beautiful, and now they're uniform and they're all the same color. We're going to incorporate these two together. We're going to really carefully put those glass pieces back together and fold those tabs down. So next time you're at the thrift store, make sure you go over to the light fixtures section and have a look around and see what you can find. Now we're ready to put these two pieces together. I'm going to get out my trusty E6000. And this is going to hold these two pieces together really well. Once I have a little bit along the base of it, I'm going to pick it up and really carefully center it onto that candle stand, and then set it aside and let it dry completely. I think this came together so well, and I'm just going to use one of these puck lights that have batteries in them. You can just put the batteries in the back, press the button, and it lights up, and it's beautiful. And you can always put a votive in it too. But what a great piece to add to your home decor on a budget. This is super simple. We always see frames all the time when you're at the thrift store. This one was only $1.99, and I think I might have even got 25% off of that. Put a white piece of paper in the back, get a dry erase marker, and you have a dry erase board to do a to-do list or a grocery list or a reminder list on a beautiful picture frame that you can stick in your kitchen or at your entranceway, wherever you need a reminder. And then you just have to take a cloth and wipe it off, and you're ready for your next list. This is so easy, and you can just imagine the possibilities of all the different frames that you can find at the thrift store that you can add that will match your home and be beautiful. And lately, I have been a sucker for homemade pottery. And this was beautiful. I'm not doing anything to it. I just love it the way that it is. And somebody has taken a lot of time making this. $6.99. I just put a little votive in it and displayed it in my kitchen window. And it's beautiful. And it's so nice when you find these things because they're one of a kind. And if you were to go to a pottery studio and look for things like this, they're so expensive, but how beautiful is this? And I just loved adding this to my home decor. Today's the day. I'm feeling creative. I'm going to pull some stuff out of my junk drawer and see what I can make. These two pieces, I'm not really even sure what they came from. I'm thinking they probably came off of an old dresser, but I'm going to attach them to this piece of pine and turn it into a welcome sign that we can put in our home. Now we need to distress this piece of wood, so it's going to blend in with these rusty pieces that we're going to put on the end. I've got some black watered down chalk paint, and that's going to be my base coat covering that whole piece of pine. And then I'm going to take some candle wax. This is just a pillar candle that I picked up at the dollar store that I use all the time to create a chippy finish. I'm putting it on this piece of pine wherever the wood would have naturally aged. And then I'm going in with my homemade white chalk paint, and I'm going to paint over top of that wax and that black stain. I love making my own homemade chalk paint. If you've never made that recipe, I have a full tutorial on how to do that. I'll put the link down below in the description. Now let's take this even one step further to make it really rustic looking. I've got some pickling salt, and while that paint is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle that salt right into the paint. And then I'm going to set it aside and I'm going to let it dry. Once it's completely dry, I'm going to take my scraper and we're going to scrape away all of that salt. And the salt melts into that chalk paint and it leaves that chippy, rustic look on your piece of wood. I always like taking the extra steps when I'm creating these projects to give it more of an authentic look, and this is just a couple ideas of what you can do. Once all the salt has been scraped off, I went back in with my sander, and here's our piece of pine. Now I want to blend in these end pieces a little bit more, so I'm taking that chalk paint and I'm just dry brushing on top of them. And once they're all dry, we're going to screw them on either end of that piece of pine. Now we're ready to turn this into a sign. I'm going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphics on this sign. If you've been watching, you know I love this technique and there's so many possibilities for transferring graphics onto your DIY projects. We're going to use our Mod Podge mat. I've printed off my graphics with my laser printer, making sure to reverse the text, and I'm just putting a light coat of my Mod Podge on the graphic. I put this in Google Docs and I've sized it. I have a full tutorial on how to do that process. Again, I'll put that link down below in the description. Once I have the Mod Podge mat on my graphic, I'm going to flip it over and we're going to attach it to our piece of pine. And don't fret if you don't have a laser printer, because this process will also work with an inkjet. I have some tutorials comparing the two, and you can check that out also. Now it's been 24 hours. I've let this sit and dry really well. Now I've got a little dish of water. I'm wetting the paper until I can just start to see the graphics show through, and then rubbing off the paper with my fingers. It takes a little bit of practice and a little bit of patience, but if you can master this, the possibilities are endless for your DIY projects. And then once I have all of the paper rubbed off, I always like to seal them up with a polyurethane or a polyacrylic sealer, and that will just help it if you want to dust it off or put it out in the elements. And here's what I created with two pieces of hardware that I had in my junk drawer, and I pulled it all together and made it into a welcome sign. I knew I was saving these for a special project, and I love this. It's going to look perfect at someone's front door. If you're a collector of drawer pulls or knobs hardware, you're not alone. I have a full toolbox full of things that I can root through for certain projects when I feel inspired. This is just a live edge piece of wood, and I'm going to seal it up with some polyurethane, and then we're going to add a couple pulls on either end. This is a super simple DIY, and if you are a reseller, they also sell really well. I just attached them on the end of each of these raw pieces of live edge that I got for free, and I love the way that they turned out. You can keep them in the kitchen or use them on a coffee table and put decor on them, and very little cost in this DIY. And I was able to use up some of my hardware. A while back, I had a friend bring me a whole pail full of hardware from doors, the plates, the knobs, and I've stuck them in my junk drawer waiting to get inspired. And today I had a really great idea. I took one of the plates and I'm going to put this quote on it that I've printed off again on my laser printer. We're going to be doing that Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. Gonna size it so it fits that plate and put it on exactly where we want it. This graphic is available in my Etsy store. If you want to create a similar project like this, I'll put the link down below. I've got all the paper rubbed off, and now I'm going to take a little bit of sandpaper and I'm just going to kind of scuff it up around the edges just so it looks nice and rustic. And then I'm going to seal it all up with some matte polyacrylic sealer spray. I want to mount this on a piece of scrap wood, so I'm measuring this just a little bit bigger than that doorknob plate, and then I'm going to cut it to size. Here's where saving all these scrap pieces of wood come in handy, because I always have something where I can pull things from that are going to work for other projects. And then I've got a couple screws that are kind of rusty looking, and I'm going to screw them in the top and the bottom, attaching them to this scrap piece of wood. I also found in my junk drawer this little key, and I'm going to take some of my E6000 and I'm going to glue it on top of that doorknob plate. E6000 works fantastic for bonding just about everything, but it does have a little bit of a wait time to dry, so I sometimes will add a little bit of hot glue that will help it stay in place while it's setting up. And this was quite an upcycle or a repurpose. Everything was from the junk drawer or a scrap piece of wood that I found, and I pulled it all together. And I love this little quote. Okay, I've had these pieces of wood for a long time, and I wanted to figure out what I could do with these caster wheels. I have all kinds of them. I'm going to cut 2 of these pieces of wood the exact same size. I was going to originally use my chop saw, but it won't fit underneath my blade, so I took it outside and I used my skill saw to cut them. And my husband was standing around watching, so I actually put him to work to do the cutting. Now I've got 2 pieces of wood that are the exact same size. I'm going to sand these down and distress them a little bit with my hand sander. I'm using some 80 grit, and it's just kind of giving it a rustic look. Of course, with all of my DIYs, you put your own spin on any of these techniques. I'm just kind of showing you ways that you can think outside of the box. If you're not a farmhouse lover or a lover of rustic, you can paint a solid color or paint them gold or silver and put your own twist on them. It's just nice that I can share the actual techniques that I'm doing here, and you can take it from there. And who doesn't love distressing wood with a hammer? I'm putting some nicks and dings in it, and now I'm going to mix up some of my homemade stain. This is just water and acrylic paint, and it's a really affordable way to create stain for your DIY projects. We're going to mix it together really well, and then I'm going to just paint it on those blocks. Once I have the blocks all painted, I'm going to leave it for a few minutes, and then I'm going to go back in with a rag and I'm going to wipe off that extra stain, and it gives a really aged look. You can use some acrylic paint, you can use some chalk paint, and just water it down and make your own DIY stain. Okay, now we've come to the part where we're going to incorporate these casters. I am going to take a drill bit a little bit bigger than the bottom of the caster wheels and drill a hole on either side of these pieces of wood, centering them right in the middle. And then I just used some E6000. I glued those caster wheels inside, and I think they made the cutest little bookends. If you want to display them on a shelf or put them cookbooks between them in your kitchen, I thought this was a great idea to use up some of these. Now I've just got some bits and pieces, and I don't actually even know what they are. If you know what any of these pieces are, let me know down in the description. But I thought these would look really good incorporated together, and you could put bracelets on it, you could put little rings on the top, or just put it in a vignette as something pretty. Also in my junk drawer were these 3 hooks, and I decided just to mount them on just a simple project, a piece of pine that I did some DIY stain on. I distressed it around the edges. It's going to be perfect to mount on the wall to hang coats or hats or backpacks on. I have so many hinges, and I'm always looking for ways to upcycle them. And I thought of this really easy one, and it's not going to take a whole lot of work. I'm just going to clean up that hinge. I've got some scuff pad. I'm going to take off any loose pieces of rust, and then I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. That will ensure if we ever want to dust it, it will clean up really easy. And I'm just going to set it on the counter here, and I've got a magnet. It sticks to the hinge. So I'm going to print off one of my favorite graphics that I've coffee stained, use the magnet, attach it to the hinge. I think this would be really great to put in the kitchen, and you could keep a recipe on, or you could put a photo on it. So many ideas, put your own spin on it, but it's a great way to upcycle a hinge. I have another one of these plates from a doorknob and a door stopper, and the door stopper fits through the top, and I thought, why can't I just take that plate and screw that door stopper into the back of the plate, and I've done a DIY hook. If you wanted it to be really secure, I've put some screws in the top and the bottom also. And I have a little wooden brush that I thought would look really cute hung on this. This is really original, and it's a great way to use up some of that junk. I'm on a roll here cleaning up a lot of this rusty junk that I had in this drawer. I've got a doorknob, I've got this little hook, it's probably off of a curtain, a spindle, and I don't know what this is, some sort of a pulley, I imagine. If you know, let me know down in the description, but let's pull this all together. So I'm gonna just kind of scuff off any loose rust on this pulley. And then I'm going to take it outside, and I'm going to give it a really good spray with that polyacrylic sealer also. This is just a nice way of sealing it up so we can dust it afterwards if we're turning it into home decor. I also find when you put the polyacrylic sealer on it, it brings out that rust color and makes it just so beautiful. Now we're going to take that doorknob, and I want that spindle to fit into that doorknob. So we're going to take the sander, and I'm just going to roll it around and just sand away until it will fit in that hole. I tried using a knife and whittling it away, but it was a really strong wood, so I found that this worked the best. And it's going to fit right in that knob. Now we're going to take it to the chop saw, and I'm going to cut it down to the size that I need for this project. I have so many spindles. I think maybe my next video should be DIY spindle ideas. I'm going to take that little clip off of that ring, and I'm going to straighten that out. I think these came from a whole bag of curtain hooks that I got at Value Village, and I just tucked them away in that drawer. I'm going to drill a hole in the top of that spindle, and the reason that we straightened that piece of wire is because we are going to stick that in the top of the spindle. I've got my E6000, and it's going to fit right in the top. Once it's dry, it's not going to budge. I also don't want the clip to spin around, so I put a little bit of hot glue in there to keep it in place. Now we're going to take that doorknob, and we're going to put some E6000 on the inside of that because that's where we're going to put that spindle, in the inside of that knob. Going to add a little bit of hot glue to the end of the spindle just so it's going to stay put, and set it aside and let it dry really well. Now I'm going to put some E6000 on that pulley, and then we're going to set that knob on top of the E6000. Adding a little bit of hot glue because that's going to keep everything in place. So I've taken a whole lot of junk from my junk drawer, pulled it all together, and made this really adorable, almost primitive farmhouse photo holder, or you could put a card in there, or so many different ideas. But I was able to incorporate and upcycle all these little bits and pieces that have just been in my drawer for a long time. Let's go thrifting, and I'm going to show you some of the fantastic treasures that I found. Right off the bat, I found this recipe box, and I can't believe somebody donating this. My mom still has my grandmother's recipe box, and we treasure it. So of course, I flipped through this a little bit. There's some wonderful recipes in here. This is coming home with me. I was also looking for some cookbooks to put on a shelf in my kitchen, mainly from decor, but when I found these, there's some really great recipes in these old cookbooks. I love the spiral binding on them. These are all coming home with me. I love finding old cookbooks at thrift stores. They have simple recipes using basic ingredients. I found one with awesome cookie recipes and another one with gifts in a jar. Remember those cookie mix jars that we gave as gifts? This cookbook's all about that, and I'm excited to try these recipes and give them as gifts to my friends and family. I'm back home and I'm going through these recipe cards a little bit closer. Who would not want Grandma's Christmas pudding recipe or coconut cream pie made by Grandma? These are such a treasure, and the penmanship is absolutely beautiful. And the tabs are worn, so you know that Grandma has gone through these recipes so many times, flipping through, trying to find the right one for a family dinner. And this little booklet that I found in the back on canning and preserving is so cute. Back in the 80s and 90s, cookbooks were super popular, especially with church or social groups. They put them together to raise money, and these cookbooks I found are just like those. I'm going to have tons of recipes to try, and they're going to look awesome on my kitchen shelf. I prefer hunting for treasures at thrift stores or yard sales to decorate my home, and finding this recipe box was the best, probably my favorite find, and I'm going to cherish it. I'm on a roll today at the thrift store, and I can't believe I found this gorgeous double boiler vintage enamel. I love the brown color. It's going to be perfect in my home. It's coming home with me, and the price is excellent. Plus, I had a 30% off discount code. I found a similar one on Etsy for $49.91, so getting it for less is awesome. I'm not planning on selling it because it's going to be special to me, but it's cool to know it's worth more than what I paid for it. I brought it home. I'm going to clean it up with some soap and water and hang it on my top rack of my metal pots and pans holder. Might not use it much, but it's going to look beautiful on display. Back to the thrift store. Always check out the craft section at the thrift store because you can find great deals on supplies, usually for less than half the price. Today I found some pastel crayons and some charcoal pencils. They're old and I can still use them, but I love the graphics and the packaging. They're going to look nice on display. There was also lots of scissors, including pinking shears, but I'd already just bought a pair at Goodwill recently, so I don't need any today. Always explore the craft section. You never know what treasures you might find, and you're going to save a lot of money. And how fun is this? Some googly eyes you probably added to stuffed animals or toys back in the 50s. Love the graphics on this packaging, but I don't need them today. But what I do need is this Omni Grid 12x12 quilter's ruler. I looked it up on Amazon. They're selling for around $25. This is a great find, and it's going to be perfect to add to my craft room. I often come across something at the thrift store that tugs at my heartstrings, like the recipe box. It's a handmade baby blanket, beautifully quilted by a grandma or a mom. I love the floral colors, and it's priced at only $7.99 plus a discount code. I can't resist. I'm taking it home, gonna wash it, and tuck it away for my grandbabies. The next treasure I found was this hand-woven wool rug. It's a bit rough around the edges with a few snags here and there, but it's only $3.99. I brought it home and I was able to tie off those loose pieces with some double knots, and after washing it in some cool water, laying it flat to dry, it now lays perfectly outside the door of my bathroom. $3.99 for a hand-woven rug? Yes, please. The next thing I found might be a bit more expensive. It was $17.99, but with my discount code, it was a bit cheaper. It's handmade and the craftsmanship is really good. However, it does need some TLC as it's never had any sealant on it. I think I'm going to apply some wax to it. Whoever made this has spent a lot of time on it, And I'm going to take it home, remove all of the mirrors, and then seal it with some clear wax. I don't have a spot for it yet, but considering the current prices of mirrors, it's a steal. I'm going to set it aside until I find that perfect spot. It's still a great deal, and someone has clearly put a lot of work into making this window and mirror. This is going to be fun to upcycle. It looks like it was a put together work stool with lots of scrap wood and bits and pieces. I brought it home because I can see the potential in it. The first thing to work on is tightening up all of these screws, and trust me, there is a lot of screws in here. Whoever made this really put it together sturdy, and I think they put some carpet on the bottom so it would slide around on the floor easily. That was pulled off and held on by only a few staples. I used some wood filler to fill all those screw holes, and again, there were a lot that had to be filled, but it was worthwhile taking the time to fill them up so the end result is going to look much better. Once the wood filler was dry, I went in with my sander and 80 grit sandpaper, sanding it all really well to achieve that nice smooth surface before starting to paint. When you're in the hardware store, always check the paint section for the whoops section. It's paint that was mixed wrong or not tinted properly, and you can usually get it for less than half price. Of course, you can't choose the color you want, but many times I find beautiful colors and bring them home for my DIY projects. I also have these beautiful napkins that were actually mailed to me by one of my crafting friends here on YouTube. Thank you, Mindy, and I'm going to decoupage them onto my stool after it's completely painted and dry. Now that looks better already. I love this light gray color, and it doesn't look like it's just a whole bunch of wood thrown together now that it's all cohesive and one color. Now we're going to start decoupaging these napkins. I never throw away that second ply of the napkin because you can turn them into DIY custom decoupage napkins, so let's set those aside. And now I'm going to start applying matte Mod Podge to the area where I'm going to apply the napkin. You want to add it sparingly. You don't need very much, just enough to glue down that napkin. I'm going to place it exactly where I want it, and then I'm going to smooth out any bubbles or wrinkles. If you put on too much, it's going to introduce a lot more wrinkles and bubbles, and we don't want that to happen. And you can also use a little bit of saran wrap and just gently go over the napkin after you're decoupaging it if you're having a hard time getting it to lay smooth. The nice thing about this napkin pattern is that they can be matched up. After laying down this one, I can take another napkin and match the pattern so it looks like one solid piece of decoupage paper. Once I've placed all the napkins down and they're completely dry, I'm going to go back in with my Mod Podge and coat these napkins, making sure they're sealed really well. You can also seal this up with some water-based polyacrylic sealer, and that will work well to seal it up and give it a wipeable surface. Once that's dry, I'm going to go in with a little bit of sandpaper and sand off all the extra napkin that's hanging off the edges. This technique leaves a nice, clean, crisp line. Now let's give everything a really good sanding. I'm not going to go over where the napkin is, but the two steps and all the outside pieces, I'm going to be sanding with my 80 grit sandpaper on my Ryobi sander. I love this. I picked it up last summer and it works fantastic. I love the ability to not have a cord. It's just battery powered, so you can take it and use it wherever you need it. Now I'm going to take some sandpaper and just go over the napkin. It's going to knock down any high edges, anywhere where it wrinkled or bubbled. It's going to sand that down and just give it a bit of an age distressed look. You don't want to use anything coarser than a 180 or it will tear the napkin. Now here it is all finished. What an improvement from that rickety old step stool that I found at the thrift store. It just needed some TLC, some paint, some napkins. I'm going to use it on my patio this summer to put some plants on. Today's video is full of some amazing thrift store finds that I'm going to upcycle. But the first one that I found, it doesn't need to be upcycled. I love it the way it is. $4.99 for this wood slice covered in epoxy, and I'm going to use it to display on my kitchen table here at the cabin. I had this bunt pan and a broken screwdriver, and I glued the two together with some E6000, and I love the way that it turned out and the primitive look of it. I also found this wreath with some faux greenery. It fit right in that bunt pan perfect, and this is ready to put on my kitchen table. These wooden slices can get really pricey, so I was excited when I found this one and it was only $4.99. I found this little metal dish. I just loved how ornate it was, and it was only $2.99, and it was really durable. Like, it was coated in a really strong enamel paint. So I'm not going to do anything to it, but I'm going to embellish it. I had this lid from a candle that the glass had broken. I'd saved it in my stash, and I knew I would be able to use it in one of my projects. I took the plastic ring off. Fit perfect right into the bottom of that little dish. I'm going to take the price tag off, clean it up, and then we're going to glue it together with some E6000. If you're in a creative rut and you can't figure out what to do with some of your pieces that you have picked up, always head to Pinterest because there's so much inspiration there, and you might see something that's similar to what you want to make, and you can put your own spin on it. It's almost like these two pieces were made for each other. I put it at my sink and it holds my little scrub brush, and because that paint is so durable, I don't have to worry about it rusting. Pillows are so expensive, so when I find a good quality one, I always pick it up, bring it home, throw it all in the washing machine, and then add it to my decor. Now this one, the only thing wrong with it was missing a tassel, so I just took off those other 3 tassels. That's going to be perfect for another project. I'm not going to throw those out. And what a cozy, comfy pillow that I can add to our living room and snuggle up with in front of our fireplace. Whenever I'm out thrifting, I always look for things that I can turn into candles. So when I found this vintage ceramic stoneware, I knew it would be perfect to add a beeswax candle into it. I had some leftover beeswax from a project I did making some beeswax wraps. If you haven't seen that video, I'll put that link down below in the description. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to melt down that beeswax. I like to do this in a tin can, and I've just pinched the edge of the tin can a little bit so when we go to pour it out, it's going to do it more evenly and not spill. I've done this on low heat. It doesn't look low. I know it's bubbling away there, but it is on low heat, about 3, and it took 10 or 15 minutes for it to completely melt down. I had these wooden wicks already. I'm going to place it in the bottom of that stoneware and then add our wick and then pour in our melted beeswax. When you're doing a project like this, make sure you're finding a vessel that's going to be able to handle the heat from burning a candle. I'm slowly pouring in that beeswax, and I'm so excited to turn this into a candle. And then after we burn it, we can always just clean it up and use it in our kitchen also. I love making these as gifts for friends and family. After it's set, I'm just going to trim back that wick. And how beautiful is this? From a vintage ceramic container that we found at the thrift store. This may be my favorite find of the day, handmade pottery coffee mug. I absolutely love the colors, and I added that to my cart right away. You might have seen me do a project similar to this. I love picking these up at the thrift store and turning them into cell phone charging stations. This one was only $3.99. It's vintage, probably from the 70s, and it's in pretty good shape. So all I need to do with this is just drill 2 holes in the side of it for the cords to go through. I wanted to upgrade the wicker tray that I had on my coffee table, so when I saw this, I knew it was going to be exactly what I was looking for. I just need to do a little bit of tweaking. It needed some feet on the bottom. So whenever I'm at the thrift store, I always head to the toy section and look for wooden blocks. They can be upcycled into so many different projects, but I love to use this size for feet. So I sanded off the graphics on 4 of those little blocks, and we're going to add them to the bottom of this wicker tray. It's just going to raise that tray up a little bit and make it look a little bit more high end. I'm going to use my E6000, but I'm also going to use my hot glue. The only thing that I would suggest when you're using those 2 glues together is try not to mix them in together, but I've never had any problems with them not gluing. And it's nice because you can move your project around and it stays put while you're waiting for it to dry. I mixed up some of my white homemade chalk paint. The base of this tray had never had any paint on it, so I'm going to put a couple coats on that, and then I'm going to flip it over and put a couple coats on the top. The top just had a few scratches in it, and the paint had actually aged and kind of got dingy looking. So by just freshening it up with a little bit of chalk paint, it's going to make it look brand new again. Once everything was completely dry, I sealed it up with some polyacrylic spray, and I love the way that it turns out. Adding those blocks just kind of elevates it a bit and makes it look more high-end. Great find at the thrift store, and I was glad that I was able to upcycle it and fit it into my home. Isn't this beautiful? $7.99, but I was not really liking the blue color, so I think I'm going to spray paint it with a matte black. A little hack when you're spray painting things like this is when you're at the thrift store, look for a Lazy Susan, or this was like a cake decorating tray, and you can put your project on it and spin it around when you're spray painting, and you can get more of an even coat. They're really handy to have, and even if you can find them in a couple different sizes, keep them in your craft room and you won't regret having them. I added some moss in the bottom, a ceramic pot that I had, and some faux ivy, and I love this. It fits in with my decor here at the cabin and much better than that blue color. When I found this handmade tiered tray, I grabbed it right away, $7.99. But it is coated in varnish, very dated looking. I'm going to use some stripper and see if I can get that varnish off. I'm using the circa 1850 stripper, and I'm just using a chip brush, and I'm really applying it all over the bowl. When I started this project, I realized how difficult it was going to be because getting that stripper on the inside of the bowls and removing that varnish was going to be tricky to get. Any sort of brush or any sort of little, even a toothbrush was hard to get in there, but I kept at it because I had a vision. I want to give this a beachy look, or sun bleached, or that driftwood finish. So I really wanted this to work. So I'm coating on the stripper. I'm going to leave it for 10 or 15 minutes, let it do its work, and see how much varnish I get off on this first coat of stripper. I have it completely covered. I'm going to put a plastic bag over it just so that stripper doesn't dry out, and let it sit. We're 20 minutes into this, and I'm going to take a scrub brush and see if I can start to take some of this varnish off. It honestly looks like it might have had 4 or 5 coats. It's probably like that lacquer, and it's thick, and it is working, but it's going to take a few coats. Going to do that process again. Put the plastic bag on it, let it sit, and I've committed to this. We're going to make this one work. I did 3 coats, and actually I got almost all of it off. There's still a little bit, so I'm going in with my sandpaper. I've got an 80 grit. It's kind of aggressive because I need to get through those last little bits of varnish, and it's coming down pretty good. I am not going to tell you how long I sanded this because it took a long time. But it was so worth it. I love the way that it turned out. It's exactly what I envisioned. I'm going to keep my candle votives in it. I put a little faux greenery. It was a bugger, but I love it. I found this teeny weeny little wooden frame, and I picked it up because I want to make a little sign for my bathroom. I'm going to take the glass out, and then I'm just going to paint it with some black acrylic paint. It's going to take a couple coats, let it dry completely, and then I'm going to go in with a little bit of sandpaper and distress it. I took one of my graphics and sized it to fit the inside of the frame and printed it off on my laser printer. This graphic's available in my Etsy store, plus all kinds of amazing graphics to craft with. If you're interested, head to my description below and you can check out and see what I have in my Etsy store. And this is what I created. So cute to put by our sink and remind people, wash your hands. This was a simple upcycle. I'm going to use it exactly what it's intended for, a plant stand, but it was dusty, dirty. Some of the paint had chipped off of it. So it just needed a refresh. I'm going to again use that cake decorating Lazy Susan, put a piece of cardboard on top so I don't completely destroy the Lazy Susan, and just spray. And as you're spraying, you can spin it around and get really good coverage. I put one of my plants on it, and such an easy upcycle. Let me know down in the comments what was your favorite project that I did today. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. There's nothing better on a cold winter's night to have a mug of hot chocolate, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to transform these thrift store mugs that I got for 99 cents with my Cricut and a little bit of permanent vinyl. There are always so many mugs at the thrift store that it can get a little bit overwhelming, but I always look for those old vintage neutral color mugs and was happy to find these mugs. I think they're probably from the 70s. I'm cutting out the word hot chocolate. This graphic's available in my Etsy store. If you want to grab it, I'll put the link down below in the description, and I'm using permanent vinyl, so after I apply this to my mug, I'll be able to put it in the dishwasher and it's going to hold up. I've cut out 2 of these so I can apply them to the 2 mugs, and then we'll have a set for our hot chocolate. Applying the transfer tape so then we can put it on the mug, and you want to use the grid on the transfer tape so you can make sure that you have it nice and straight when you're applying it. Before we do that though, we have to make sure that we have a really clean area for the vinyl. So I like using rubbing alcohol, and I clean the whole mug so there's no fingerprints or little greasy spots that's going to prevent the vinyl from adhering properly. You also want to make sure that you're putting your graphic where you're going to see it when you're drinking your hot chocolate, depending on whether you're left or you're right-handed. My mug also doesn't lay flat for the graphic to stick on it, so I'm removing as much as I can around that graphic so when I put it on, it's going to lay flat. Now I needed somewhere pretty to keep our hot chocolate. I found this glass container at the thrift store. It was $1.99 and the top fits really snug. This is going to look really pretty if you want to add it to a coffee bar or a hot chocolate bar rather than having just that hot chocolate container sitting out. Added a few marshmallows to the top, and you can scoop out a few marshmallows and add them to your mug when you're making your hot chocolate. This was so easy to put together and really affordable with things just from the thrift store, and it's a great way to enjoy a cup of hot chocolate on a winter's night. And check out this mug that I found. Isn't it gorgeous? Handmade ceramic mug, 99 cents. When I found this, brought it home, scrubbed it up, made a coffee, and enjoyed it by my fireplace. I love pillows to accessorize every holiday, but they are really expensive. So I'm going to show you how I made a couple pillows with a pair of pajama pants that I found at the thrift store. Now these were a size XXL, so there's a lot of material here for us to work with. I washed them really well, and then I pressed it with my iron, and then I cut the cuff off of each leg. I am not a seamstress, so I'm going to show you how you can do this without needing a sewing machine and to put these throw pillows together really easy. Now I'm going to cut the end of the leg where it's not started to taper, and it's really easy with these snowflakes because I can cut right along and have a straight edge. Now I'm going to take the other leg and cut the second pillow the same size. Now we're going to open up that one end of the fabric, and we're going to fold in and make a crease along the bottom of that, and we're going to get the iron and press it so it lays nice and flat. If you don't have an iron, you can skip this step, but it does make it easier to put it all together if you can have it laying nice and flat. Now you're just going to take your hot glue gun and you're going to just glue the bottom of both of those pillows all the way along that crease. And then for the opening that I'm doing here, you're only going to glue it halfway. That's going to leave an opening for us to put the stuffing in, and then we'll finish gluing it after we have it nice and full the rest of that opening. I had an old pillow that was stained and it had a rip in it, so I deconstructed it and I'm using the stuffing from that to fill up this pillow. You can also go through the fabric at the thrift store or even pillowcases, and if you love the design on it, turn them into pillows. Just using your hot glue gun, it is so easy to put together. And the cost is a fraction of the price of what you would pay at a retail store for pillows. And after we've got the pillows all put together, we still had the waistband elastic that I can use on a DIY, the ribbon in the waistband. I cut some into some ribbon to add to DIY projects, and 3 patches of fabric left over. And how cozy are these flannel pillows that I made from a pair of pajama bottoms? It's so easy to put these together with just a little bit of stuffing and a hot glue gun, and I've made these pillows that I'm excited to cuddle up with, a hot chocolate, and a good book by my fireplace. I found the cutest little hand knit mittens at the thrift store, and I have a clothing tag, and we're going to pull this all together into some really cute winter decor. So the clothing tag, I always save these because they're really easy to turn into little gift tags or hang tags to hang on your DIY projects. And I'm just painting this with some acrylic paint to blend it in and kind of give it a primitive look. Now I've printed off another graphic from my Etsy store. This one is really great for cozy winter decor, winter wonderland. I printed it off on my laser printer on just regular computer paper, and I'm coffee staining it. This is just instant coffee, a little bit of warm water. I've taken a paintbrush and I'm just painting it over top of that graphic. And now we're going to attach it to that clothing tag with a little bit of glue from my glue stick. I'm going to cut it down a little bit so it's a bit more of a manageable size to apply to the tag. I also sped up that coffee stain with a heat gun so it dried quickly. Really great way to do quick DIY coffee stained paper. Now we're just going to attach that tag to that graphic, trying to get it centered the best that we can so it's going to be in the middle of the tag, and pressing it down firmly. I'm also going to use my roller and really press it hard and get it attached really well. And then I'm just going to use my scissors and trim around the edges. So don't throw out those clothing tags. Put them in a little container, save them, and you can make some really beautiful custom tags if you like doing mixed media, junk journaling, or just to add to gifts. And then I'm going to take my hole punch and I'm just going to re-punch the hole in the top of that tag, so we'll be able to attach this to our mitten project when we're all finished. I want this to have a real primitive feel, so I've got some ink out and I'm just going to go all around the edges of this tag. Gives it that real rustic feel, and I love it. Now I'm just going to roll down the cuff of these handmade mittens and fill them up with some greenery that I had in my backyard. This is really easy to put together. You can always go and look for a sprig at the thrift store or some greenery that you've had for Christmas and take out any of the gold or red accents and give it more of a neutral feel, and it will fit your winter decor. So next time you're at the thrift store, look for a nice cozy pair of mittens that you can do this DIY with. If you want to add a little bit of winter decor into your home, this is an easy way to do it. Anyone can. And it's just replacing a print in a picture frame from the thrift store. I picked this up for a couple dollars, and we're just going to replace the print that's already in it. It just came out really easy. It was just taped in the one spot, and I've printed off this graphic that I designed. I love the wintry feel of this, Winter Wonderland skate rentals, but I wanted again to give it that primitive feel. I love that look. And you can just print out a graphic, and you don't have to do this coffee stain step, but I thought that was how I wanted to present this DIY. After I did that, I kind of regretted it and I decided to go in and coffee stain the mat too. And I was not really feeling it. I hope this is going to pull together okay. But it was kind of a mess with the coffee stain. Sometimes, you know what, I just try to make things a little bit more difficult than they actually have to be. And I probably didn't need to coffee stain that. It would have looked nice just in the frame, just with the print, but hang tight. You'll see what it looks like in the end. I decided to also paint the frame and give it that black rustic feel. So I just went in with some black chalk paint and painted over the entire frame. And once it was completely dry, I went in with some 80 grit sandpaper and I sanded the whole frame here and there just to give it that rustic primitive feel. Okay, you'll have to go down in the comments and let me know what you think about the coffee stain and whether I overdid it or not, and I could have just left it as is. I think I actually could have just left it as is. I don't mind the coffee stain, but it would have stood out nicer just having that ivory mat and the beautiful graphic. Now I'm going to show you some things that you can look for to add some winter decor to your home that you don't need to upcycle. Look at this beautiful votive holder in the shape of a snowflake and this little wreath, but it doesn't have any sprigs of red or gold. It just looks wintry, and I think it's going to look beautiful just to put that little votive holder in and display over the winter season. I also like to add doilies into my winter decor. This one was $1.99 and I feel like they kind of look like snowflakes. And this blue crackle glass votive holder is beautiful for the winter season. It was $1.99 and I can put a votive candle in it and it's just going to shimmer on a blustery winter night here at the cabin. Another thing that I love to do is switch out my table runners for scarves. This was a beautiful white scarf and I'm just going to drape it over my little chest that I have here in the living room. Add a wicker tray with some winter decor on it, and I think it just makes everything look nice and snuggly. I hope you've enjoyed all of today's winter DIYs. Now you can head over to Teresa's channel, the link will be down below in the description, and check out all of her winter DIYs that she did today. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care. Come on, let's go thrifting, and I'm going to show you some of the fantastic treasures that I found. Right off the bat, I found this recipe box, and I can't believe somebody donating this. My mom still has my grandmother's recipe box, and we treasure it. So, of course, I flipped through this a little bit. There's some wonderful recipes in here. This is coming home with me. I was also looking for some cookbooks to put on a shelf in my kitchen, mainly from decor, but when I found these, there's some really great recipes in these old cookbooks. I love the spiral binding on them. These are all coming home with me. I love finding old cookbooks at thrift stores. They have simple recipes using basic ingredients. I found one with awesome cookie recipes and another one with gifts in a jar. Remember those cookie mix jars that we gave as gifts? This cookbook's all about that, and I'm excited to try these recipes and give them as gifts to my friends and family. I'm back home and I'm going through these recipe cards a little bit closer. Who would not want Grandma's Christmas pudding recipe or coconut cream pie made by Grandma? These are such a treasure, and the penmanship is absolutely beautiful. And the tabs are worn, so you know that Grandma has gone through these recipes so many times, flipping through, trying to find the right one for a family dinner. And this little booklet that I found in the back on canning and preserving is so cute. Back in the 80s and 90s, cookbooks were super popular, especially with church or social groups. They put them together to raise money, and these cookbooks I found are just like those. I'm going to have tons of recipes to try, and they're going to look awesome on my kitchen shelf. I prefer hunting for treasures at thrift stores or yard sales to decorate my home, and finding this recipe box was the best, probably my favorite find, and I'm going to cherish it. I'm on a roll today at the thrift store, and I can't believe I found this gorgeous double boiler vintage enamel. I love the brown color. It's going to be perfect in my home. It's coming home with me, and the price is excellent. Plus, I had a 30% off discount code. I found a similar one on Etsy for $49.91, so getting it for less is awesome. I'm not planning on selling it because it's going to be special to me, but it's cool to know it's worth more than what I paid for it. I brought it home. I'm going to clean it up with some soap and water and hang it on my top rack of my metal pots and pans holder. Might not use it much, but it's going to look beautiful on display. Back to the thrift store. Always check out the craft section at the thrift store because you can find great deals on supplies, usually for less than half the price. Today I found some pastel crayons and some charcoal pencils. They're old and I can still use them, but I love the graphics and the packaging. They're gonna look nice on display. There was also lots of scissors, including pinking shears, but I'd already just bought a pair at Goodwill recently, so I don't need any today. Always explore the craft section. You never know what treasures you might find, and you're going to save a lot of money. And how fun is this? Some googly eyes you probably added to stuffed animals or toys back in the 50s. Love the graphics on this packaging, but I don't need them today. But what I do need is this Omni Grid 12x12 quilter's ruler. I looked it up on Amazon. They're selling for around $25. This is a great find, and it's going to be perfect to add to my craft room. I often come across something at the thrift store that tugs at my heartstrings, like the recipe box. It's a handmade baby blanket, beautifully quilted by a grandma or a mom. I love the floral colors, and it's priced at only $7.99 plus a discount code. I can't resist. I'm taking it home, gonna wash it, and tuck it away for my grandbabies. I love finding free stuff at the dump, especially when I see potential in something. Today's video is all about chairs I found at the dump. I've got 4 projects, and this is the first chair that I'm going to upcycle. Do you all remember these chairs from Grandma's kitchen in the 1950s and 60s? My grandma had one, and it always gave me really good memories because I would sit with her at the counter and help her cook or get a meal ready. It's in pretty rough shape, but I'm going to see what I can save. I'm not sure if I can, but I'm going to take it apart and see what's underneath this dry and crackled vinyl. The actual metal frame is still in really good shape, so even if I have to replace the seat and the steps, it's still going to be a great project. As you can see, the seat is really crackled, the bottom is dirty and torn apart, and the steps are in really bad shape. I think the wood underneath is like a press board, so it has probably gotten wet at some point and expanded. Don't think I'm going to be able to save these. Everything has been stripped off the metal frame. It looks pretty good. It has some rust here and there, so we're going to have to sand it down a bit to prepare it for painting. Staying with the theme of finding things at the dump, I found this huge piece of pine, brought it home, and it's going to be perfect to remake these pieces from the chair because they're not going to be usable. So I'm just going to trace out that chair pad, the chair back, and the 2 footrests from this piece of pine. Wood can be really expensive, so I always have friends and family or myself look for pieces of wood at the dump that I can reuse. Saves a lot of money when you're upcycling a project and you don't have to go to the hardware store and buy a brand new piece of wood. All the pieces fit perfectly on that piece of pine. You can see there's a few footprints on this pine too, but not to worry because when we sand everything down, we'll be able to clean all of that off. Now I'm going to get out my jigsaw and cut them all out. And there we go. That was easy. We got all of those pieces cut out using the template of the older pieces. I want to give it a bit of a rustic feel, maybe a farmhouse twist. So I'm taking my hammer and dinging it up and banging it up a little bit just to make it look distressed and rustic. Then I'm going to go in with my cordless hand sander to smooth out the edges and make them look worn and rounded. Okay, now let's tackle this frame. It has some surface rust that can be removed with a scuff pad or a 120 grit sandpaper. I'm going to work on that entire metal frame of the chair to clean it up and leave it nice and smooth for a good finish when we're ready to spray paint it. I'm going to be using the Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch spray paint. I've taken it outside where it's well ventilated to give it a nice light coat for the first coat on the chair. After 2 coats of spray paint, the frame looks beautiful. Now we're ready to tackle the chair pad and the steps. I'm going to be using my DIY coffee stain. I love the color that the coffee stain creates on pine. You just use instant coffee and some warm water. That's it. Eyeballing the amount of coffee for the desired darkness of the stain. I'm going to start staining the pieces, going over them 2 or 3 times until I get the color that I'm looking for, and then I'm going to set them outside and let them dry completely. Okay, now let's dive into the world of transfers. I'm going to show you how you can do a transfer on raw wood. This method works fantastically. You need a label sheet with a shiny side and a water-based sealer like a polyurethane or a polyacrylic sealer. I have a full tutorial on how to do this technique with lots of detailed steps. I'll put the link right here, or you can go down in my description and I'll have it linked down there. I printed on the shiny side of the label sheet using my laser printer, making sure to reverse the text. And this graphic is also available in my Etsy store. Here's the link right here if you're interested in purchasing it and trying it on one of your DIY projects. This process, unfortunately, does not work on an inkjet printer. First, apply a liberal coat of that polyurethane over the entire chair seat. Once it's covered, place that printed label sheet on the chair seat, making sure it's centered and exactly where you want it because you can't move it once you place it down. Once placed on the piece of wood in the polyurethane, I like taking my brayer and pressing it down really hard. We really want that label sheet to have contact with the wood and the polyurethane underneath. You're probably going to have to go over it a few times. You might get some wrinkles here and there, but just keep going back and forth. Some polyurethane will likely sneak out around the edges. Just take your paintbrush and clean it up. And if you don't have a brayer, you can always use a credit card, which also works really well. We just want to make sure that it lays nice and smooth. I'm only putting a graphic on the seat of the chair. For the other pieces, I'm applying polyurethane to seal them really well. This has sat for about 20 minutes and look at this magic. The graphic has transferred onto the piece of wood from the label sheet. It's nice, it's crisp. I love this technique, especially for putting a graphic on plain wood. Now I'm going to apply a top coat and it's finished. I love the look of this. If you haven't tried this technique, you need to give it a try. It's one of my favorites. Now let's put this all together. I'm using the original screws because they're still in good shape, and I'm going to screw those wood pieces that we've sealed with 2 coats of polyurethane back onto the chair. Now this looks absolutely nothing like it did when we started, but I actually like this version better than the original. It has that rustic industrial farmhouse feel. It's heading to my kitchen. I'm keeping this one. I love the graphic on it too. Something that was destined for the dump that most people would completely overlook and just let it get crushed, I was able to save and create something beautiful again. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this chair upcycle. The next chair I'm upcycling that I found at the dump is this really cute little chair, but I'm not feeling the timeout monkey graphic on the top. So I'm going to use some 80 grit sandpaper to remove as much of the graphic as I can. Then I'm going to use some candle wax to distress the chair. This is just a pillar candle from the dollar store, and I like to use it to create a distressed paint look. I'm going to take that candle wax and rub it everywhere where it would have naturally aged. When I put the paint on top of it, the paint won't adhere wherever the candle wax is. So when we sand it down, it's going to give that appearance of a chippy, worn look of paint. I'm using some of my homemade chalk paint. I have a fantastic recipe. If you want to try it out, I'll put the link right here for you to scan, or you'll have it down in the description. My chair took 2 coats of that homemade chalk paint, and now I'm taking it outside and I'm going to distress it with some 80 grit sandpaper. Again, wherever that candle wax was, the paint isn't adhering and it's going to create this fantastic chippy look. Now I'm back to these graphics again. These are great projects for adding graphics and they sell really well. This one's available in my Etsy store. I'll put the link right here for you to scan or down below in the description. This is done on my homemade napkins. I have a full tutorial on how to create your own napkins that you can decoupage with. It's really simple. It's 1 ply of a napkin that I've printed on, and you can now decoupage it right onto your project. I'm going to take a plastic sleeve and placing my graphic face down, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of water on it until the napkin is just damp. You don't want the straight edge of the napkin, so you want to create a ragged edge so it blends into your project better. So I'm using the edge of my scissors to go along that edge of that napkin, removing a little bit of it to make it ragged. I've done this on all 4 sides, and then we're going to apply it on the chair. Now we're going to decoupage that napkin onto the base of the chair using some matte Mod Podge. You want to apply a light coat over the surface where the napkin's going to lay, and you don't want to put too much on or it's going to bubble and wrinkle. You just really need a light coat. Now we're going to pick up that plastic sleeve with the custom made napkin and center it exactly where we want it, right in the middle of that chair. Then we're going to smooth it out and make sure that there's no bubbles or wrinkles and it's laying nice and flat. The nice thing about this technique, if it's not exactly where you want it, you can pick it up and you can move it around. Now carefully peel away that plastic sleeve and you have decoupaged your custom napkin onto your project. I like to take a little piece of cling wrap, and if there's any bubbles and wrinkles that are showing up, you can use that and just pat them down nice and flat. And we have transferred that custom napkin onto the base of this chair. I think this looks much nicer than the previous chair, and it's going to look fantastic in a farmhouse kitchen. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this upcycle. Next chair I dragged home from the dump is this Adirondack chair. It's actually in pretty good shape, but it just looks worse because the paint is chipping and peeling. But I know I can upcycle it, and I know how expensive these are to buy, so I'm going to put a little elbow grease into it and save it. The first thing that I'm going to do is scrape away all of that loose paint. Make sure you keep your eyes peeled for projects like this on the side of the road. People will put them out at the end of their driveway. I found dressers, chairs, home decor that I was able to bring home and upcycle for free. You might be surprised what you find when you start looking for projects like this. With the loose paint gone, I'm using my palm sander with some 80 grit sandpaper to remove any of the rest of the remaining paint. Paint is gone, it's cleaned up really well, and we're ready to paint. I love using tester paint from Home Depot to try out all colors for projects. It's affordable and you only need a small amount since it's just a tester. I found this lovely green color in an exterior latex paint, perfect for withstanding the elements since the chair is going to be outside. This was an amazing find at the dump. It looks brand new. I've seen these at our hardware store for over $100, so I'm glad I snagged this one. After painting it with some exterior paint, I've definitely added many more years to its life. My next upcycle project is a chair I found at the dump in pieces. The back was broken off, but all the pieces were still there. I have an idea of how to revive it and make it usable again, keeping it out of the landfill. I have the holes in the back of the chair, but luckily all the spindles were still usable. I'm reinforcing them with some wood glue before tapping them back into place to fill those holes. I constantly come across old wooden chairs, many of them surprisingly sturdy. Often a little TLC on the spindles and some reinforcement might be all that they need. However, this chair's back was so broken that I could only salvage the spindles to use them as plugs for the holes. I don't like the thick varnish on the chair, so I took it outside to sand it with some 80 grit sandpaper with my palm sander while I wait for the spindles to dry. You can see how the varnish is caked on the legs and it's really clogging up that sandpaper. Looks like I'm going to need to switch to plan B. I broke out the furniture stripper and I'm applying it over the chair. This should eat through the varnish much easier than sanding through it. I'm letting it sit for about 15 or 20 minutes and then I'm scraping off all that varnish. That should be a breeze. I should have started with the furniture stripper in the beginning, even though I knew the varnish was thick. We all like to try the hard way first, right? But as you can see, after 15 minutes, the varnish is scraping right off, revealing this beautiful wood underneath. It's really heavy and sturdy. I'm not sure what type of wood it is. If you know, let me know down in the comments, but it's definitely worth saving and upcycling. One of the spindles was already broken off in the chair. It's a little bit rough, but when I go back in and sand the chair after I've taken all the varnish off, it should smooth right out and blend in. I've enlisted my husband's help and he sprayed off all the remaining loose varnish with the pressure washer. Now I'm going to let it dry in the sun. My husband is a power sport mechanic, so he has all these fancy tools, and I'm going to be using his Sawzall to cut off these spindles to make them even with the chair. But no worries if you don't have something like this. You can use a good handsaw or a jigsaw can do the trick just fine. With all the spindles removed, I went back in with my sander to smooth everything out. Isn't it beautiful? I sanded the entire chair and transformed it into a stunning rustic stool. So much better than ending up in the landfill. To finish it off, I'm going to be applying a coat of clear wax for protection. I'm opting for more of a natural look rather than using a polyacrylic sealer or a polyurethane. I'm rubbing the wax into the chair and it's absorbing beautifully because the wood is nice and dry. This really makes the wood grain pop and it's simply stunning. I love how this turned out. We've taken a broken chair and transformed it into a beautiful rustic stool. This makes 4 chair upcycles. I've breathed new life into them and they all have new homes. Okay, lots of ideas for this shelf, but most of them involve taking it apart. And I think that's what I want to do. I want to take it apart. It's just too big, too much of a clunky shelf for me. So I'm going to take it apart. I'm going to turn it into 3 different projects. I have everything all taken apart, but when I took it apart, I didn't really pay attention, and this end is different than this end, and I want them the same. So I've just put the board over top, traced where I need to cut it so I can have both ends the same. I'm going to take those out to my shed and get those cut, and this I'm going to use as a little shelf. And I want to cut the legs on a little bit of an angle so when you put them against the wall, it'll lay flat. So I've traced out the line that I'm going to cut there. I'm going to use my jigsaw to do all that. I'm heading out to my shed and I'll be back in a minute. This is one end off of the shelf and I cut it so now both the ends are the same, so it'll look nice and uniform. And I'm going to do a transfer with my polyacrylic sealer. I've done lots of these on my channel. If you haven't seen this done before, it's very similar to the Mod Podge, except you're using polyacrylic sealer. And I like using it if you don't want to paint your wood. If you want to keep your wood just the raw wood color, then this works well because it dries a lot clearer than Mod Podge. When you're doing the Mod Podge transfer, it has almost like a cloudy texture to it after you finish doing the transfer, where this one doesn't. So I am going to make a sign for a bathroom. I'm using a matte finish with the polyacrylic, and you're just going to paint it all over your graphic, and then we're going to center it on the sign, and we're going to let it dry. Now this method dries a little bit faster than the Mod Podge, so this can be ready to finish up in a couple hours, where the Mod Podge you have to leave overnight, I find, to get the best results. So we're going to just flip this over, make sure it's nice and centered where we want it, and then get all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, and we're going to let it set aside and dry completely. This is sat overnight. We're going to take a damp cloth and just wet the paper until you can start to see the graphics show through, and then rub it off. I got all the paper rubbed off. This is a little bit trickier to do on raw wood with the polyacrylic, but it does work. As you can see, it's not perfect. You get a really rustic transfer. But that's what I kind of wanted for this sign, so it worked out perfect. And now I'm going to seal it with some polyacrylic sealer. A beautiful natural wood sign, just made with polyacrylic sealer. Takes a little bit of patience, but it works fantastic. The other end of the shelf, I think what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to turn it into a big farmhouse sign. I had this chunk of wood, and it's really kind of rustic looking. I'm gonna screw this board into the top of it, make it all one piece, and turn it into a real old vintage sign. I've got it all nailed together with a little bit of wood glue, but there's a little bit of a crack right here, so I'm gonna take my wood filler. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm just gonna take some wood filler and just kind of fill it in a little bit, just so it looks like it's all one piece. My wood filler is all dry and I am ready to get painting. I'm going to give this a real chippy, fantastic farmhouse look. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some candle wax, and then I'm going to add some black chalk paint. My black chalk paint's all dry. I haven't done any crackle paint in a while. That's what I'm going to do today. And if you haven't seen me do it before, it is so easy. All you need is school glue, and you just put it on your project. As much as you put on will determine how thick or thin your cracks are. I'm going to do probably a pretty thick coat so I can have some pretty big crackles in this. And you just spread it out over your whole project. You can use any kind of school glue. Just the cheap stuff works too. You don't have to use the Elmer's. And just spread it all over everywhere that you want your paint to crackle on top. Just spreading it around really good. And the places where you have it thicker or thinner, then you'll have thicker or thinner crackles. I have a full tutorial with the full steps. I'll put a link down below in the description and you can watch that. Okay, we're gonna let this sit just to tack up just a little bit for about 2 or 3 minutes. It's been 2 minutes. I'm gonna take my white chalk paint. Now the trick with this technique is just do long strokes. You don't want to go over that paint any more than once or twice, and don't pull your brush back because that will wreck the crackling effect. So you just kind of slop it on because we're trying to achieve like an old rustic vintage looking piece of wood. So they're never perfect looking. And you can go up and back, but don't do any more. Just leave it as that. You can go up and back, and you can go up and back and leave it. Slop it on, and you can do more colors underneath too. You just can kind of play around and see what you like. Okay, I'm gonna leave that. We're gonna let it crackle, and you'll see the fantastic result when it's all dry. This is all dry, and look at the cracking and the aged look that this has. I'm gonna take it outside and I'm gonna give it a really good sanding to finish it off. We are ready to turn this into a sign. I am going to do my Mod Podge reverse graphic. I have printed off, I'm using a graphic that I made, Vintage Market Antiques Junk Buy Sell Trade. You can, as you can see, I've printed these off on 3 different sheets. Just keep sizing it up until you get the size of your board within your Word program, and you can make bigger signs. I have a full tutorial with a more in-depth step-by-step on how to do that. I'll put a link down below in the description. I'm just gonna cut these out and size them up on my board and get them where I want to before I get the Mod Podge going. Okay, after I printed the graphics off, I wasn't really happy with the size that they were and how they looked. So I fooled around with them a little bit, resized them, and I really like the way this is now. And this took a little bit of time, a little bit of measuring. You keep making them bigger in your Word program or smaller to fit the area that you want, and it works perfect. So we're gonna use our Mod Podge mat and get this put on the sign. Okay, it's the next day and I'm gonna finish this sign up. Now, one tip, if you are making signs on top of this crackle paint, you have to make sure that you don't put too much water on. If you put too much water on your sign, it will reactivate the glue and it'll rub off really easy. So you have to just be really conscious of that. Just put just enough water on, just so you can just start to see the letters show through, and do small sections. Don't do the whole sign and make it all wet. Just do one section at a time and just take your time. I have it all rubbed off, and it's a little bit of a job. I did this through fast speed, so you didn't have to watch me do it, but it actually took me probably about a half an hour to finish this and rub off all the paper. So it is a bit of a job, and you can see here, I've done a lot of these signs, and even still, I rubbed some of that off. I don't mind it with this type of a sign because it's very rustic, very vintage looking. and I'm really happy with the way that it turned out. I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and we're finished. So just taking the top off of that shelf, I was able to create this with another piece of scrap wood that I had. So easy, and I love it. If you haven't tried that crackle paint technique on any of your projects, give it a try. It's lots of fun, and I'll put a link down below in the description for the full tutorial I have on it. Okay, first project is an old aluminum, I think, frying pan. I have a really great idea to use this in the garden. I've taken this down to the sink and I've given it a really good scrub with some soapy water. And now I'm going to use some alcohol and clean the inside of it because we're going to put some Cricut graphics on this. I've designed some graphics. We're going to print it off on our Explore 3. I got my graphics all weighted and the transfer tape on, and I'm just going to peel them off and put them on my frying pan. Make sure I have it nice and centered. And we'll get it stuck down. And I've made a fun sign for the garden. The handle of the frying pan, I've just stuck into the dirt. We have only frozen ground here right now, but once I'm ready to put my garden in, this is going to go out there as decor. This is going to be a really easy upcycle. I'm just going to turn this into a hanging plant hanger. I'm going to use this as the base, find a pot that will fit in here. I think it would look beautiful with a nice ivy in it. And I am going to use this old chain that I found out of the scrap metal bin to use as the hanger. This was such an easy upcycle, and I'm pretty sure that was probably off an old antique lantern. I just love the bottom of it. It's so ornate and beautiful. I filled it up with some greenery. The chain makes it easy to hang. I love the way it upcycled. You guys know I love my farmhouse signs. I'm going to make a very rustic farmhouse sign with all of this stuff. Put something together with one of my great graphics. I'm going to use the chain and turn it into a hanger on the top when it's all finished. So lots of work. Let's get started on this. We are all ready to work on our sign. I'm going to put a base coat of some black homemade chalk paint. Whenever you're wanting to do the Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer, you always want to make sure that you pick a piece of wood that's really smooth. I'm always up for a challenge, and this is not really smooth in this area right here. I'm going to take a little bit of wood filler and just fill it in so it's a little bit smooth. Because what happens when I go to rub the paper off, it gets all in these little grooves and it makes it really difficult. So just to make my life a little bit easier down the road, I'm going to put in a little bit of wood filler. I probably should have done this step on the raw wood, but I always get excited when I'm starting a project, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this completely dry now. I'll let all that wood filler dry. Actually, my wood filler was kind of watery. I think it's almost at its end of its day. I need to buy a new one. But that's okay because it worked out really well because it smoothed over really good and filled in all those little creases of wood that I wanted to get covered up. Gonna let this completely dry, give it a light sanding, and then I'll put another coat of black paint over top of it. This is a lot smoother now that I've got the wood filler on there. It'll be easier to rub off my graphic when I need to. I want to keep an outside edge that looks like a border of the black paint. So I've got my painter's tape, and I'm just going to put that all around the outside. got it all taped off, and I'm just going to take some black and just paint along the side of that tape. So if we have any bleed through, the black will show and not the white. Just going to put a touch of candle wax on this just to distress it just a little bit, and I'm going to rub it all along that whole opening. And now we're ready to put on a coat of white chalk paint. All dry. Let's see what we have underneath this tape. Ah, perfect. That's going to be a really great base for my sign. Let's make this look a little bit more rustic and chippy. Gonna take it out to my shed, give it a really good sanding. I'm gonna do my Mod Podge reverse graphics on this. I love this quote. It's in my Etsy store if you want to grab it. Make sure you use the code SAVE50 for 50% off. I think it's going to work out really well with all the bits and pieces that I want to put on it also. I have sized this on 2 pieces of paper. It's really easy. You just size it up until you get the size of your sign that you want. I'm just going to cut off the little extra paper on the top and the bottom and get putting it on our project. This is sat overnight. It's all dry. I'm going to take my damp rag with just a little bit of water, and we're going to rub off all of this paper. I've got all the paper rubbed off. I'm going to seal it up really well with my polyacrylic sealer. Top coat's all dry. I have all these little bits and pieces of stuff I've collected along the way, and I thought it would be really nice to kind of put them on this sign to display and just give it a little bit more interest than just a plain sign. So I've got some old screws that I've collected from other projects that I've done. I'm going to use those to screw everything on the sign. This was an excellent way to use up all those little bits and pieces of hardware I had collected along the way, and a perfect graphic to add to that sign. Love finding beautiful pieces of wood in this scrap wood pile. This is really nice and solid, and I am going to turn it into a serving tray. These old handles, they've got some paint that's been splashed on them. It actually almost looks like an enamel paint. I don't think it's going to come off very easy. So I'm going to spruce these up and do a nice finish on this and turn this into a serving tray. This is when I put the handles on, this already had a handle on it at some point, and the holes are exactly where it needs to be. So I'll mount this right here, and then I'll measure on this side to make sure that it's even. So this is already done and easy for me. I'm going to put my first coat of paint on. I'm going to put a coat of my black homemade chalk paint. First coat's all dry. Breaking out the candle wax. I love using the candle wax to distress, and this has got lots of lines and curves where we can put that wax on to make a fantastic chippy finish. I had a follower mention in one of my comments that I don't use enough color. The one reason why I don't use a lot of color, especially in the stuff that I'm making, is if you're doing it to resale, white, black always sells. As soon as you introduce any sort of fancy color, it's harder to sell. That being said, I'm keeping this for myself, and I am feeling colorful today. I am going to layer up all kinds of colors on this and do a real chippy layered color paint. I'm first coat going to use some acrylic yellow paint. all dry, some more wax, and we're going to put on some peacock blue. We are good and layered. I've got my scraper out. I'm going to scrape away at this. The first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to heat that wax back up, get it nice and melted, and then scrape away. I thought the colors were a bit too bold. I want to tone it down just a little bit. So I have just a little splash of almost like a baby blue. I'm just gonna swipe on a little bit here and there just to tone it down just a little bit. Now for the magic potion, some Elmer's school glue. I'm gonna put a crackle layer on the top and then put some white paint on, and we're gonna have all those colors showing through. The more glue you put on, the thicker the crackle. The thinner that you put it on, the thinner the crackle. And I'm just gonna spread it all over the whole piece of wood. It's a little bit messy, but it's so worth the end result. And you want to get it right out to the edges because you want that crackle to be all the way across all of the wood. This is going to be such a fun, funky tray. I'm excited to see how it's going to turn out. It sat for about a minute. Now we're going to take our white chalk paint, and the trick with this technique working really well is to not work the paint into the glue. You want to do long strokes, up and back, no more than twice. So up and back, and then up and back. And we're going to do that across the whole piece of wood. If you're working that paint into the glue, you're not going to have any crackles show up. This is such a fun technique to watch it all come together too, as you start to see all of the paint peek through. Such a fabulous technique if you haven't tried it. Okay, we're gonna leave that. Gonna take a couple hours and let it dry. This is completely dried and crackled, and look at the color and the crackles in this. It turned out just amazing. And I am now going to give it a really good sanding. I'm going to take it out to my shed, use an 80 grit sandpaper, and sand all of this and really make it distressed, and it'll make the colors pop even more. Fantastic. I love it. I'm going to paint the handles a nice yellow color, I think, to match this yellow that's peeking through here. I don't do much with a lot of color, and I thought that would make this into a really fun tray if I painted these yellow. I'm gonna take them outside and spray paint them. Here's a little trick that I like to do when I'm spray painting. This is just a takeout food container. I've pressed, there's little screws in the bottom of these handles. I've pressed them into the styrofoam. It keeps them up, and you can spray them really well with spray paint. Grab them out of your recycling bin. I'm gonna seal this up really good. I have some polyacrylic sealer, satin based, and I'm probably going to put 2 or 3 coats of this on this tray. The tray's all finished from that scrap wood. I love the way the handles turned out. I kind of distressed them a little bit, and the boards distressed beautifully. Successful. Okay, so these were all grabbed out of the metal bin, and I saw potential in them, and I think I can make them pretty. I'm just gonna wash them up to get all the grime and dirt off them. My favorite paintbrush, the Worcester. I'll put a link down below in the description and up above because it's a fantastic paintbrush. And I'm gonna put 2 coats of my homemade chalk paint all over this whole bucket. This homemade chalk paint recipe is really fabulous, so I'll also put a link down below and up above here for that recipe. I'm going to put on my farmer's market graphic. This is available in my Etsy store. And I printed my own graphics out on these napkins. It's a really easy technique. I also have a tutorial for that. I'll put that link down below and up above here. And I'm just removing all the edges, all that straight line edges, and make it kind of ragged so it blends into the pail better. I've got it on a plastic sleeve. I'm going to put it upside down and put water all over it so it will be easier to manage when I put it onto my sap bucket. I find if I was just going to put this napkin without having it doing this technique right on the bucket, it seems to really go wrinkly and gets lots of air bubbles. This seems to eliminate a lot of that by doing this technique. You have to be very gentle because it'll rip really easy, but I'm just kind of pulling it out just to get any little wrinkles out of it, let the water soak in, and then I'm going to take a cloth and dab up all the excess water. And now I'm going to use my Mod Podge mat, and I'm going to put a thin layer over the whole area where I'm going to put that graphic on. And this type of decoupaging is just called a water transfer. Super simple, super easy, and I always have really good results with it. So you should give it a try. Now you're just going to pick up that plastic sleeve with the graphic on it and lay it right where you want it. And the nice thing about this is if you can just really gently move it around if it's not centered exactly where you want it. Just be very careful because it is very fragile. And then you're just going to press it down with your fingertips and get all those little wrinkles and air bubbles out the best that you can. And when doing this technique, you always want to have the same color background as the napkin. So that's why you want the white on the white, or you will be able to see the outline of the napkin. Very gently peel away that plastic sleeve. Make sure you're not bringing up the napkin, and it is adhered perfectly to your project. And then I just like to take a little bit of saran wrap kind of rolled up in a ball, and just if there are any wrinkles or bubbles left, you can just press them out with that and it'll get rid of them. I've let it dry completely, and now I'm going to put a top coat. And because this is probably going to be outside on either my covered deck or porch, I'm going to put my Varathane outdoor polyacrylic sealer in a matte finish. I like using the outdoor because it's a lot more durable than the indoor, especially if you're going to have your project outside. And I'm going to put a real good coat over the whole project and then set it aside and let it dry. Next project, this rusty old bucket. And I'm going to just dry brush, just latex paint over it, just to kind of brighten it up a little bit, because I do want to put graphics on it also. And if I was just to put it on just the raw pail, you wouldn't be able to see them very well. So I'm just putting a real dry brush coat of white latex paint all over the whole pail. Okay, hang on, there's a ding in the side of it. I'm gonna bang it out with my hammer, so hold tight. I'm gonna have a little bit of a wiggly camera for a second. And I'm just gonna work away at this, and it probably will completely almost get that dent right out of it. And for this pail, I'm going to use my Vintage Market graphic. I love this one. And I'm going to do the reverse Mod Podge transfer. And you're going to print this off on your LaserJet printer, reverse the text, and then you're going to Mod Podge it onto the pail. So I'm going to put a liberal amount over the whole graphic and then stick it onto the pail, and you want to let it set overnight. And then in the morning, once it's dry, I'm going to rub off all the paper and the graphic will stay on the pail. Make sure you have it exactly where you want it on the pail, because once you set it down, you can't move it. So have it lined up really well, press it down, get all the air bubbles, all the wrinkles out of it, and you're good to go. Okay, I left this overnight and now I'm going to dampen it with a rag with water. And you just want to dampen it till you can start to see the graphics come through, and then you're going to take off the paper. This is a little bit of a fiddly technique. Sometimes it works perfect. Sometimes you might have little bits and pieces that rub off where you don't want it to. I don't mind that because when I'm using this technique, it's always usually in a farmhouse theme, decor, or a sign where I don't mind if it looks a little bit rustic. And especially when you're doing it on metal, it seems to not adhere as well as a wooden painted surface. So just be patient, give it a try, and if it doesn't work out the first time, paint over and try again. Okay, all finished, and I'm going to put the same Varathane outdoor finish on this pail also. And sometimes when you do this technique, you'll find that there's kind of like a cloudy bit left on from the paper. When you put this sealer on, it will get rid of most of that cloudiness. And this one looks so rustic and farmhouse. I love it. I can't wait to put a plant in it. Okay, now to tackle this big planter. I think I'm just going to take the handles right off of it because I don't know how I'll get that wooden piece off that other end. So they're quite easy to pull off. I'm just going to take them off, set them aside, put them in my shed because I'll use them on some other project. And I decided I wanted to do the salt and pepper painting technique on this. I want it to kind of have a faux cement finish. So I'll put the recipe down below. This is an awesome recipe to create that cement look, and it's really easy. So I'm just gonna, it's probably gonna take 2 coats, maybe sometimes 3 coats, but I'm gonna put a nice liberal amount over this whole project. It has a real nice grainy stone finish to it with the salt and pepper added into the paint. And I love using it. And now on to the second coat, and you kind of want to dab it on. You don't want to put too many brush strokes in it. And now for the finishing touch. You're going to take some of that pepper and you're going to take your brush, and the second coat is still wet. So while it's still wet, you're going to take your pepper and just dab it into that wet paint, just kind of randomly all over the whole pail, and it'll give that rock cement finish look. And again, I have a full tutorial on this recipe and other projects that I've done with it. So check that out after you've watched this one. Okay, now it's completely dried, and I'm going to use my polyurethane spray and seal it all up really well. I didn't want to brush on. I wanted to just use the spray so I could keep that cement looking finish, and this should be good to set outside too with this formula. Okay, all finished, and I love the way that they turned out. They're going to look fantastic on my deck and on my porch. And the best thing about it is they were all free. Other than the cost of the little tiny bit of paint, I've upcycled these, give them a new life, and I love when I can do that. There's no better feeling than taking junk and making it pretty and saving it from the landfill. We are going to upcycle these pot lids. If you've been following along for a while, you saw I did a really big yard sale haul and I found a bunch of random pot lids, and I had an idea of how I wanted to upcycle them. Today I'm going to show you what I created. I have 4 pot lids. They're all different sizes, and I'm going to incorporate them into this old wooden door. This is an old pine cabinet door, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off all of the hardware, and then I'm going to cut it down to size with my skill saw. I'm cutting it down to the size I need it, and I'm going to save that other piece for a project at the end of the video, so make sure you stick through so you can see what I create with that also. I think this DIY needs a really good chippy paint finish. So we're gonna create that with some salt. This is a really easy painting technique to create that vintage chippy looking wood. I know it's not for everybody, but I absolutely love it. So I've painted the piece of wood with some white chalk paint, and while the paint is still wet, I sprinkled on some pickling salt. Put it outside, let it dry in the sun, and now it's completely dry, and I'm putting on my next coat of this red latex paint. You can switch your paints up and use any type of paint. I'm just using up what I had, and I love this red color. The red paint is still wet, and I'm sprinkling that pickling salt right into that wet paint. You can use any type of salt. The more coarse, the more chippy, the more fine, you're gonna get not as much of a chippy finish. You have to really make sure that your coats of paint are completely dry before you put on your next coat. I've put on this turquoise on top of that red paint and the salt. Once it was completely dry, now we're gonna let that coat dry. Put it out in the sun, let it really dry completely, and now I'm just gonna take my scraper and just scrape off all of that salt. And as you do that, wherever there's salt, you're gonna scrape down to that color underneath, and it's gonna expose, for this project, as you can see, it's gonna expose the white paint, the red paint, even some of the bare wood, and it creates a chippy old vintage look. Once I've got it all scraped down, I'm taking my 80 grit sandpaper, really aggressively sanding it, and then we're gonna seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer spray. And this is what I've created. It's gorgeous, I love it, and we're ready to incorporate those pot lids. I want to screw the pot lids right onto that piece of wood, but I don't want the screws to show. So what I'm doing is I'm taking off all of the knobs off the lid, and then I'm gonna screw holes underneath the knob so that we can attach it to the piece of wood and you won't be able to see it. Now the smallest lid already had a hole in it for steam to be released, so that one already has a hole. We're just gonna roll with that one. And the knob was actually riveted right on, so I couldn't take it off. Now I had to put on my upcycling thinking cap for this because once I screwed the pot lids onto that piece of wood, I'm not able to put the knob back on. So I thought if I use this Gorilla Glue, I could glue the screw into the pot lid, screw the pot lid on the piece of wood, and then I'm able to screw the knob back onto the pot lid once it's attached to the piece of wood. Kind of confusing. Once you see how I do it, you'll understand. And now we're ready to screw those pot lids onto my gorgeous chippy piece of wood. I'm just using a regular screw and just screwing it right in. And the pot lid that already had the hole, I'm just going right through that. And then we're going to be able to just screw those knobs on because I glued the screws into the back of the lids. So now you can see what I was trying to do. I love the look of these tarnished lids and the old knobs. It just has such a fantastic rustic farmhouse feel. So I've taken this old cabinet door and these pot lids, and this is what I've created. A beautiful place in a farmhouse kitchen to hang some kitchen utensils, tea towels. You can hang it at the front door, hang some coats on it. Love the way that it turned out. Okay, next project. I found this old candlestick holder and this old teapot. Everything had been given kind of a rough coat of black spray paint. I am going to fix it up and upcycle it into something very beautiful. We're going to paint on a couple coats of my homemade white chalk paint. And once I've let the couple coats of the chalk paint dry completely, I've got a baby wipe. You can use a baby wipe or you can use a wet cloth. And I'm just going to rub away at the paint in just areas where it would have naturally aged and just take away the paint. And it's just going to give it that old vintage look. This is a great technique when you don't want to sand and ruin the surface underneath your project. You can just use a baby wipe or a damp cloth and you can see how it just brings out those colors from underneath, and I love the look. Now I want to put this graphic on my teapot. I'm going to be using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method, and this graphic's available in my Etsy store if you want to try out this project afterwards. I'm just going to put a light amount of the Mod Podge mat on that graphic, put it on the teapot, and then set it aside and let it dry for 24 hours. This technique works the best on a LaserJet printer. Don't forget to reverse your text. Okay, it's the next day. I'm taking a damp rag. We're going to just wet the paper until you can just start to see the graphics show through, and then rub off the paper. We're going to be left with a beautiful graphic on our project. I'm now going to attach the teapot to the candlestick holder using my E6000. It bonds really well. I'm going to add a little bit of hot glue. I know some people have said that you shouldn't mix the two. I've never had any problems, and it's always bonded really well. Set it aside. We're going to let it dry until the next day, and then we are ready to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer. I love this clear gloss, and I've taken this teapot and candlestick holder, and this is what I've created. I filled it up with some fresh herbs, and it's beautiful to set on your patio or out in your garden area or even in your kitchen, and you can clip off your herbs as you need them. Remember that piece that I cut off the bottom of that cabinet door? I'm going to upcycle it now. I did a chippy paint technique with some Vaseline to make it look really distressed around the edges, and I'm going to add this garage graphic using the same technique as I did on the teapot. Mod Podge, matte finish. We're going to put it all over the graphic, set it down, wait for the next day, rub off all the paper. We're left with a fantastic graphic, and as you can see, I just love this technique. It's so nice and crisp. I'm using my LaserJet printer, and I'm just using regular computer paper. And if you're doing this technique yourself, make sure to remember to reverse your text or your letters will be backwards. So I've taken this scrap piece of cutoff from that cabinet door and turned it into a beautiful garage sign. Love the chippy paint on it. Would be a great gift to give to grandpa or dad to put up in their garage. I was so excited when I found this chair. It's in really good shape and it's still really sturdy. I am going to preserve this paint. I try really hard to achieve chippy paint like this, so I'm not going to sand it down and start from scratch when this is what I usually try to get on most of my projects. I'm just going to take a 220 sandpaper and just sand the entire chair and bring some of that lighter teal up from underneath. When it was all finished being sanded, I put some black chalk paint on the base of the chair just to kind of neaten it up because it was kind of blotchy in different colors underneath. I'm going to seal it up with some polyacrylic sealer, and it will be ready to display on my porch. This is going to be covered with a roof over it. If I was going to have it out on a deck and exposed to the elements, I would seal it with an outdoor polyacrylic sealer. I love the chippy layered look that I achieved just by doing a little bit of sanding, and it is gorgeous. Next project, we're going to work on this window. The one pane of glass was broken, but that's okay because I can work around that and it'll just give it a little bit of character. I've cleaned it all down with some soapy water and some TSP just to get any grease and grime off of it. And again, like the chair, it has a fantastic chippy finish and I want to try to preserve that. I scraped off any loose paint chips, washed it down with soap and water, and then once it was all dry, I sealed it up with some polyacrylic sealer. Once that was all dry, I'm taking my Windex on those window panes and I'm making sure it's nice and squeaky clean for the next step. I had these stencils and they fit perfect right in those square panes. I'm going to spray on some spray adhesive so I can place the stencil in that glass and it won't move around when I paint it. And using my stencil brush, I'm going to paint with my black chalk paint. And once it was dry, I'm going to peel that stencil off and I'm going to repeat that process on all of the other panes. I love using the spray adhesive because it keeps that stencil nice and firm in its place. Once it's all dry, we're ready to use the Mirror Effect spray paint. I love this stuff and I've been using it on a lot of projects, and the effect is fantastic for creating an antique looking mirror. I've taped off all the wood with some painter's tape. When you're using the Mirror Effect spray, you have to have a solution of 50% vinegar and 50% water. I've just put some in my spray bottle and I'm going to spray on the Mirror Effect, a light coat, and then I'm going to take that water and vinegar mixture and just spritz it on that wet spray paint. Once it's sat for about 30 seconds, you're going to take a paper towel and just dab at it. You're just going to dab wherever there was that vinegar and water mixture. That paint is not going to stick, and it's going to give it that mirror vintage effect. I'm going to do 2 coats on this mirror, doing the same process. You can spray the vinegar water before you spray or after you spray. I don't find it makes that much of a difference. Everything is completely dry now, and it already is starting to look fantastic. But we're going to put some black paint on the back of this over top where we put the spray paint, and that will let the mirror show through better. Just putting 1 coat of my chalk paint over all 4 of those panes and then peeling off the painter's tape, and it is all finished. If you haven't used this Mirror Effect spray paint, you should give it a try. I'm almost obsessed with it with all of the projects that I've been using it on. I'll put a link down below in the description so you can grab some for yourself. And what a great dump find. Now to tackle this table leg. It has that metal claw foot and the glass ball inside. It is absolutely gorgeous, and I wanted to incorporate it into a vintage antique looking sign. I had this rusty chain, and we're going to use that to hang the sign from the table leg. To make new wood look old, I like to take a hammer all around the outside and put dings and chips and holes in it before I paint it. I'm going to use some candle wax all around the outside. Wherever you put candle wax, the paint's not going to adhere, and it just gives it an extra level of layers. First coat, some of my black homemade chalk paint. I always like to start with the darkest color first. Now we're going to start layering up some colors. The first I'm going to use is this green acrylic paint. I really like creating a crackle finish with hairspray. So after that acrylic paint has dried, I'm going to put a really good coat of hairspray all over that board, and then when it's dry, I'm going to put the next layer, which is this orange, and then put another layer of hairspray on. Hold tight. I know this looks funky, but it's going to be worth it in the end. I wanted a little bit more of that green color, so I'm just kind of putting speckles of it all over the top of that last coat of hairspray, just brushing it on dry, and then I'm going to put on my last coat, which is some white chalk paint. Now to get that crackle to activate, I use my heat gun. I use it on the low setting, and you'll see as I dry, those crackles are already starting to appear. It creates a really fine crackle. It's such a fantastic way to make a new piece of wood look old. And then I'm just going to take my scraper, and anywhere there was candle wax or different layers of paint, it's going to bring up those different colors. And I like to use a stencil brush, dip it in a little bit of water, and just brush away some of that top coat so it looks more aged and gives you those 3-dimensional colors. I'm going to finish it off, sanding it with an 80 grit sandpaper. And we've taken a piece of brand new pine and made it look antique and old. Now we're going to turn this into a sign. I'm using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. I've printed these graphics off on my LaserJet printer on regular computer paper. If you want to try this technique, make sure you remember to reverse your text. If you want to create one of these signs for yourself, this graphic is available in my Etsy store. Make sure you use the code SAVE50 so you can get 50% off all of my graphics in the store. The sign has sat for 24 hours. I'm taking a little rag with a little bit of water on it and just dampening them so you can just start to see the graphics show through the paper. And then you rub the paper off and you're left with a fantastic graphic on your sign. And this is what I created with that table leg from the dump. I think it worked perfect with this sign, and it looks old and vintage and antique. I still have the other table leg, and I think I'm going to make another sign like this because I love this one. I'm ready to tackle this gorgeous rocking chair. I couldn't believe when I found it, and it's actually in really good shape. The wood's kind of dried out and the caning is a little bit brittle, but I'm pretty sure I can save it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and wash it all down with some TSP, get it nice and clean, and then take a sanding block to it, a 220 grit, just to knock off any high edges or any little bit of stain or paint that may be left on it. I wasn't sure what products to use on it, so I took a picture of this chair and then I went to our local Home Depot. I have a fantastic painting section there and they're really helpful. and they pointed me in the right direction of what products to use. I'm going to put on some linseed oil that will just moisturize it and help it not be so brittle and stand up better. And for the wood, I'm going to be using some penetrating oil wood finish, and I just got a clear finish. I didn't want to stain it another color. I wanted to keep it this color. So I'm really excited to get at this and see how it turns out and talk about a fantastic dump find for free. I was so excited. I got it all prepped and it's ready for the finishing oil. I used a 220 grit sandpaper over the whole thing. It worked really well. There's a few spots that it didn't come up and it left a little bit of a dark spot, but that's okay because it'll just give it character. And then we're going to put the penetrating oil on next, and then I'm going to, when that's all dry, put the linseed oil on the caning, and I am going to have a beautiful rocking chair. So let's get to work. That I'm going to do today is this piece of wood. Now, what I think it is the end of a crate. I think there would be two of these and then that would be built into a box. But I think that it kind of looks like a cutting board. So I am going to aggressively sand it down. It had a lot of grooves in it from when it was cut. I'm trying to get it as smooth as I can. I'm going to do my polyacrylic transfer method on this board. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a really good coat of my polyacrylic sealer. This is water-based, and you want to make sure with these projects you're using water-based so it doesn't yellow on you. And then we're going to do the transfer method with these CD label sheets. We want that shiny piece of paper underneath. I always find these at the thrift store and I pick them up. They'll work with address labels, but you have to use a laser jet printer with this. It will not work with an inkjet printer. After that first coat of polyacrylic had dried, now I'm putting on a second coat of that polyacrylic sealer, and while it's still wet, we're going to lay that label sheet down into that wet polyacrylic sealer that we've printed on with our laser jet printer. And then we're going to press it down really firmly and make sure that it's right into that polyacrylic sealer. Let it dry. It'll take a few hours depending on your weather, and then you just peel off that label sheet and your graphic's going to be left on your project. Now you can see my wood was still a little bit rough and the transfer didn't take in that one little area, but it still looks fantastic. I love that rustic feel of it. Now this isn't going to be a usable cutting board. This is for decor only. But I love the way that it turned out. And my dad gave me these for free. I have 6 or 7 other ones too that I can't wait to do this technique on. Whenever I head home to visit my parents, they live 3 hours away, I always tell my dad, save any little bits and pieces that you think I can upcycle or scrap wood, and he always does. I'm pretty sure this came out of an old sewing machine cabinet. I'm going to clean it up really well with a wipe, and then we're going to take 2 candlestick holders and a little glass knob, and I'm going to glue them onto this sewing machine drawer. Now the E6000, I always struggle with it when it comes to the end. A little hack, cut it in half and you can squeeze more glue out of it. We're going to glue those candlesticks onto the bottom, the knob on the front, and I've turned this old sewing machine drawer into an elegant piece of home decor. friend give me these baskets for free. She didn't want them anymore, so I took them because I have an idea of how I love to upcycle these, and I'm excited to share them with you because it's so easy to do. I find the handles really date them, and a lot of times you can just take the handles right off the basket without affecting the basket itself. This one just cut right off. And if you are out and about at the thrift stores or yard sales, these baskets are super cheap. You just have to take a look at them and see if they're attached and weaved right into the basket. If not, then they're easy to take off. This one just pulled out. Takes a little bit of strength to pull it, but it comes out nice and neat, and then you're left with a basket without a handle, and I just think it doesn't look as dated. Now I'm going to take the plastic liners out of these, but if you're going to keep them as planters, then just keep the plastic liner in them if they do have it. My circle of friends all know that I am a fanatic when it comes to upcycling, so they're always giving me stuff that they don't want anymore that I know I can upcycle and I can get it for free. And I love that challenge. Now here's how you can update these wicker baskets. I have a stash of hardware and I just pull out what I think will look nice on the baskets, leave the little screw in the back, poke it through that basket, and it'll adhere to the front of it. And I just think it just gives it that upscale look than just a plain basket. And then you can display it in your home and fill it with whatever you would like. These look fantastic with greenery in them. You can put them in the kitchen and keep your tea towels and your utensils in them. You can put them in the bathroom on the back of the toilet and fill them up with toilet paper. So many ideas, but I find just by adding this little handle on the front of them, it just really takes it to the next level. And if you can't fit the little screws through the weaving on the baskets, you can always just hot glue that knob or that pull onto the front, and that will work perfect also. Now this basket, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to flip it upside down. I had this piece of hardware in my stash, putting some hot glue on it, and I'm going to glue it to the front of this basket that's turned upside down. Going to make sure that it sticks really well, and wait till you see what I did with that one. So I've taken all of these baskets, added the hardware to them. I think it's really perked them up and made them not look so dated when I've taken the handles off of them. And this little basket, by turning it upside down and adding the hardware to it and then putting a plant on top of it, it just raises your plant a little bit, and I think it looks beautiful. I found this little piece of a spindle in a burn pile. Actually, I just cut the ends so they were nice and flat. We're going to get out our Gorilla super glue, this votive holder that was in my stash for forever. We're going to glue it on top of that little piece of spindle. And I've created this really cute little candle votive holder. And then by having it on that bottom of the spindle, I just think it looks really primitive, and I just love the way that it looks. Next project was this old basket that was in the wood pile at the dump. Somebody had made it into a little Easter themed basket, but it was really needed to be upcycled. I'm going to spray it with some black spray paint. It's just going to kind of give it that distressed look underneath after I put the chalk paint on top. I'm going to put a couple coats of that chalk paint, and then I really aggressively sanded it with some 80 grit sandpaper, and this is what it turned out like. Now we're going to put a graphic on the front using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. You've seen me do this lots. I've printed this off on regular computer paper. We're using our Mod Podge mat. We're going to apply the Mod Podge onto the front of that graphic and then put it on our project, get all the bubbles and wrinkles out of it, let it sit for 24 hours, and then dampen it with a rag, and then rub off the paper. Once I had all the paper rubbed off, I'm going to add some polyacrylic sealer. So this was our before and this is our after. Love it. And putting that kitchen graphic on the front, you can fill it up with tea towels and utensils. Would look perfect in a farmhouse kitchen. And this was a fun upcycle. Okay, so here's the dresser, and I found it in the dump, in the wood pile to be thrown out. And it needed a little bit of TLC. I power washed it, took all the handles off of it, and gave it a real good sanding. I then painted it with my homemade chalk paint, and I gave everything 2 coats. The black color that I used is the Bear Marquee Black, and I love this color. I have a tutorial on how you can mix any paint into a chalk paint, and I'll put that link below in the description. The nice thing about making it into a chalk paint is you don't have to prime anything before. After it had completely dried, I put the pulls back on and left the natural color. And I also found this frame in the dump, and I think it was probably off of a cabinet or a dresser, and it originally had a mirror in it. I decided to put a pegboard in it and create my craft station. I got a sheet of pegboard from Home Depot, and I volunteered my husband to give me a hand and cut it out to fit the inside of the frame. We traced out the size of the pegboard and then used our scroll saw to cut the exact size to fit right in where the mirror would have been. And it fit in perfect. I went to our local Home Depot and I picked out a color that I wanted to paint the frame in, and I am loving this color. It is the Bear Marquee and it's called Glazed Pears. I'll put the code down below in the description. I washed the frame all down and then gave it a light sanding, and I'm going to give it its first coat of the glazed pears. And I gave it 2 good coats before it was finished. Now we just took our drill and a small drill bit and drilled holes so we could put in some finishing nails to hold that pegboard in tight. And we just took the finishing nails and put them in that little pilot hole and gave it a little tap all around the whole pegboard. And there's my finished craft dresser, and all it costs was the cost of the pegboard and my paint. It's got lots of storage in the drawers, lots of room for me to add lots more onto my pegboard, and I'm loving the yellow color. So if you ever see any of these out in the wild when you're out thrifting, or if you are having access to grabbing any free stuff curbside, pick them up, because you can create some beautiful things that was actually probably just meant for the dump. I love to upcycle and repurpose, and I think this turned out pretty good. It was a success. First project that we're going to work on is, I think this is off the back of a chair. I found it in the wood pile at the dump, and it probably had broken, and this was off of the top. One bonus was somebody had already painted this black, which I love. So I'm just gonna distress it and make it look rustic and not repaint it. I used an 80 grit sandpaper, and I love the color of the wood peeking through. Just finished it off perfectly. Now I'm going to use my wax, and I'm just going to wax that whole frame, and it just makes everything pop even more. And the back of it, I'm eventually going to paint it, but for now I've just cut a piece of press board, and that's what we're going to turn into our sign. Painted it with some black chalk paint, and then I'm putting some candle wax all around the outside just to give it a distressed look, and it's going to fit right into the back of that frame perfectly. Now we're going to get at the graphics. If you've been following along, you know I love using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. That's how I'm going to make this sign. Using my Mod Podge mat, I've printed these graphics off on my LaserJet printer, making sure to reverse the text on regular computer paper, making sure that it's lined up exactly where I want it, and I've let it sit for 24 hours now, dampening the paper and then rubbing it all off, and we're left with beautiful graphics on this piece of press board that we're going to put in the back of that chair. I'm going to seal everything up with some polyacrylic sealer, and then I had these little tiny nails, and I'm going to nail that press board into the back of that chair frame. So here's the before, that old frame off the back of a chair, I think, and I have upcycled it into this gorgeous sign. And I love this quote. It's available in my Etsy store if you want to grab it and make one of these signs for yourself. Always be on the lookout for any type of salvage wood that you can turn into a sign, because they sell really well. Project that I'm going to tackle is this barn board with the hinges. It looks like it was obviously a door of some sort, and I'm going to upcycle it into something beautiful. I had this plaque that I picked up at the thrift store, was stained, some of the lettering had rubbed off, so I painted it with some of my black chalk paint, and then I dried it to speed up the process with my heat gun. This was a piece of paper that I printed on, coffee stained it, really wrinkled it up, and I'm going to decoupage it on the front of that plaque, just using some Mod Podge mat. Once the Mod Podge has dried, I'm going to seal everything up with a matte polyacrylic sealer. The nice thing about all of these projects is the only cost that I have in them is a little bit of the cost of product. Everything else was found and was free. That way I can make a good profit when I go to sell it. And I had these rusty old screws that I saved off another project, and that's how I attached the plaque to this barn board. I love the way that this turned out. This actually might be staying with me. That's one of the problems I have. I create these things and then I can't get rid of them. Okay, next piece of salvage wood. I have absolutely no idea what this was, but somebody spent a lot of time cutting this out and then they just discarded it. So saw the potential, brought it home. This one is going to turn out fantastic. I have a really great idea. I'm going to layer up lots of chippy paint on this. First step, I'm using my candle wax. I'm putting candle wax all around the outside and the inside of this salvaged wood, and then I'm painting over top of that with some homemade black chalk paint. If you've never made homemade black chalk paint, I'll put a link down below in the description so you can make a batch yourself because it works fantastic. Now we're going to be really aggressive with this candle wax. I'm applying it over all of this black chalk paint. Anywhere you put candle wax is going to have the paint that you put on top of it not stick very well. And I have got this beautiful acrylic paint that I'm putting on top of this. This is just acrylic paint that I picked up at the dollar store, but I love the teal color of it. Once it was dry, I went back with the candle wax again and was really aggressive. Applied it all over, got out that yellow paint that I love. I'm almost at the end of this tester with the yellow paint. Let it dry completely, and then I'm putting the candle wax on top of that again. Now I've dried that paint completely, and I've also softened up that wax with the heat from the heat gun. Using my scraper, I'm scraping away at that paint, and anywhere there was that candle wax, you're going to bring up those colors from underneath. So look at all of this beautiful chippy texture that I've created just with a little bit of paint and candle wax on a free piece of wood. Now for the back, I just found this piece of wood I had in my stash, and I'm going to paint it with some black chalk paint, and then I'm going to put some of that yellow on, and we're going to give it a little bit of a textured chippy look also before we turn it into a sign. Now all of my signs I sell locally. I'm very fortunate, but there's many ways that you can sell them. Facebook Marketplace, on Etsy, you can go to craft sales, or if you have a booth, these all sell really well. And when you don't have to pay anything for the wood, all you have is the cost of your products to make them, you can have a higher profit and have more money in your pocket, and you can be really creative in the process. I designed this graphic, and I think it's going to work perfect on this piece of wood. Doing my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. Now I have a full tutorial on how you can size your graphics. I had to do this in 2 or 3 steps so I can get all the right sizes of the graphics to fit on this piece of wood, and it sized up and worked perfectly with this graphic. It's available in my Etsy store if you want to grab this one. If you're a tea lover, it's a must graphic. I'm going to use my hot glue gun and press that piece of wood in its spot, and then I'm going to go in and just tack it in with some of those little nails and paint the back so it looks nice and neat. Lots of tips and tricks and inspiration here, so if you find some salvaged wood of your own, you can make some signs. I'm just taking some 80 grit sandpaper and I'm sanding this down because it had a really glossy finish on it and I want my paint to be able to adhere to it. So taking it right down to the bare wood. I have some wood filler. I'm going to fill up those holes, let it dry, and then get painting. When I'm making my signs and I want them to have that distressed old look, I always start with the base black. I find when I'm sanding it afterwards, that black peeks through and it just gives it that aged look. But that's my preference. You don't have to do that step. Now, if you missed my video on how to DIY your own silicone molds, you have to go back and watch it after this video because you can make your own molds and you can incorporate it into so many different DIY projects. This is a mold that I used with a stamp, and I am going to incorporate this into my sign using some air dry clay, pressed it into the mold, and I'm just going to make sure the back is nice and flat, and then we're going to peel it out, and I have this gorgeous air dry clay piece that I can put on my sign. I'm going to clean it up a little bit and then set it aside and let it dry. Now, this is the next day. I used my Gorilla Glue to glue that clay embellishment on the top, and I'm just putting on a couple coats of my white homemade chalk paint and taking in and just dry brushing around that mold with a little bit of that black chalk paint, and one last distressing around the outside. If you're a seamstress or love to sew, you're gonna love this graphic. Same process, Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. As far as making signs, this is the most affordable way. You don't have to buy vinyl, you don't have to buy stencils. All you need is a little bit of Mod Podge paper and a printer. And you don't even need a laser jet printer. You can do this process with an inkjet printer also. And I have some videos comparing those two printers together so you can see the difference. I printed these graphics off on 2 or 3 different sheets, sizing them up the way that I wanted them to fit on this sign, and it is absolutely beautiful. I love it. I love this graphic. Again, it's available in my Etsy store. So I've taken that boring piece of pine, and this is what I've turned it into. So if you're looking for a way to make a little bit of extra spending money, making signs is the way to go, and they always sell really well. I found this cabinet in the dump. Looks like it was a wall cabinet with a shutter on the front with a couple shelves, and I had an idea what I wanted to do with it. A little dusty and a little dirty, and I'm going to clean it up and upcycle it into a beautiful cabinet. I'm going to incorporate these spindles and this little top that I found off the back of an old chair and put them together with the cabinet. I thought that would look really cute on the top. I'm going to screw that in so it's kind of a focal point on the top of the cabinet. And the spindles I'm going to cut down and make 4 legs for the base. This is a great way to make legs for any pieces of furniture you have. If you have old spindles laying around, just cut them down to size and screw them into your project. I'm going to remove the back off of the cabinet because I have a fabulous idea in my head of what I would like to do with it. I'm going to wipe it all down, give it a little bit of a sand, and prep it for some homemade chalk paint. This is my homemade chalk paint that I make. I have a really great recipe. I'll put the link below in the description. It adheres really well to any kind of shiny surface or veneer, so you don't have to do very much prep work, and it works fabulous. I'm going to remove the hinges and the knobs, and I always have paint everywhere. I'm going to remove the hinges and the knobs and get ready to paint the cabinet. And I'm going to give it a light sanding all over just to get rid of any crud, because it looks like it has been stored and it's quite dusty. I'm just using an 80 grit sanding block and just scuffing everything all up. I get so excited when I find pieces like this, especially in the dump when it's free, and I know that I can do something with it to make it pretty again. So this has been a fun project for me, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I'm excited for the outcome. Okay, and I'm going to put a coat of the black chalk paint all over the cabinet. Anyone that's painted shutters before know these things are a bugger. Just takes patience and time. I'm going to put a coat of paint on the spindles that I've made into legs, and the piece of the wooden chair top that I'm going to screw onto the top of the cabinet. Everything has one full coat of the black chalk paint, all painted and ready for the next coat. Now everything's going to get a coat of the homemade white chalk paint. And everything is going to get a real good sanding. I'm using a 80 grit sandpaper on my palm sander, and I'm going to scuff up everywhere where it would be used or would wear down if it was really old, and that's going to make it look like a really shabby chic piece. Now for the fun part, I'm going to decoupage some napkins onto the back of the cabinet. So I'm just going to, these are 3-ply napkins, so I'm going to take the back 2 ply off and just work with the 1 ply that has a flower pattern and decoupage it with my Mod Podge. What I'm going to do next is I like to have a rough edge along the napkin when I put it down on the piece of wood, because it blends easier and it doesn't give you a straight line when you put the next napkin next to it. You can kind of blend the 2 pieces together and it looks much more polished and finished. I just got these napkins at the dollar store here in Ontario, and I just love the flower print on them. I've used them now on a couple projects, and I wish I had have bought a few more packages of them. Okay, now we're ready to Mod Podge the napkin onto the piece of wood. So I'm just going to put a light coat on the board that's the size of the napkin. You don't want it too thick because it'll bubble and wrinkle a lot, but just a nice thin coat for the napkin to adhere to it. And when I'm going to put it down, I actually don't mind if there's going to be a few wrinkles in it, because that's kind of the look that I'm going for. And it's windy in here today, so the napkin's kind of blowing around a little bit. But you're just going to place it where you want it, and then just lightly just press it down. And then I like to take my paintbrush with just a little bit of Mod Podge on it and just adhere it down to the board a little bit better, and push down all those little edges to make sure that they're sealed to the wood. After the napkins have completely dried, put a light coat of Mod Podge over the whole surface. You'll see some of the little wrinkles in it. I don't mind those. I'm going to give it a little sanding once it dries completely and make it look kind of rustic looking. Now I'm going to screw the top piece onto the cabinet, and I'm just going to screw it with 2 screws from underneath into the piece of wood. This is just a fabulous piece, and it was broken off of an old chair that I found in the dump, and I saved this because I knew I would use it for some project someday. And I got the spindle legs screwed into the base of the cabinet. I am loving this. I love the floral print, and it's going to look so perfect on the back of the cabinet. When you open up the doors, you'll see this floral pattern and make it look really vintage. And I'm just going to nail the back onto the cabinet with the little nails that I took out of it. I've got it all nailed back down, and I'm going to put a coat of the black chalk paint on the back of it, just because it looks more professionally finished if you have the back painted, I think. And there you have the finished cabinet. Everything completely sourced from the dump. The chair back, the cabinet with the old shutter door on it, and the spindles that I cut down for legs. My favorite is the back though, with the floral print. It just, I think, finishes the whole cabinet and makes it look amazing. I hope you've enjoyed today's Trash to Treasure makeover, and to see that it is possible to take something that was in the dump and make it beautiful again. The first thing I'm going to do is use a wire brush. I picked this one up at the hardware store. You can also find them in Walmart, Home Depot, probably even the dollar store. And I'm going to take the wire brush along the grain of the wood. This will help make the grain of the wood stand out more when we put our layered colors on. And there's no fancy way of doing this. You want it to look rustic and you want it to look kind of chippy. So I just take the wire brush back and forth. You can even go side to side and you'll see that you'll get little bits of sawdust coming off from the wire brush and the grains of the wood will be standing out more. Takes a little bit of elbow grease, but it's a good workout for your arms. You can also do this step with a wire brush on a drill, but I just found I didn't have as much control and I like using the brush better. And you can see how it's starting to bring out the raised edges along that grain. Palettes are really easy to find, especially around here, and there's never any shortage of them, so I always can find lots to make signs or any little project that I want to do. And you can see the grain in this one, it's got a nice little swirl to it. And once we put the paint on it, it's really going to stand out. Okay, now we're ready to paint. I have some latex paint in a tester jar and some acrylic paint. And that's all you need to do this project. My first layer, I always like to use latex paint. You want the latex as the base because then when you do the next step, it will work better. So I'm just putting a liberal coat over the whole palette board. Make sure you get it in all the grooves and all the little nooks and crannies. If you use chalk paint or acrylic paint as the base, I find I didn't have quite as good of an effect in the end, so I always try to use the latex paint. Now it's completely dried and I have an 80 grit sandpaper on my sander, and I'm going to be really aggressive and sand all those high parts of that wood right down so your board is flush. And then you're going to have two colors. You're going to have your bare wood and you're going to have your latex paint, and that's what you want to do. Now you can maybe not sand it as much, but what we're going to do is we want to stain the wood on the top. So the more that you sand off, the more contrast you're going to have between the two colors. And it already looks fabulous just the way that it is right now, but wait until we do the second step. And what I love about the palette wood is each piece is so different. They all have different grains and different saw marks in them, and it just gives your project that you're making so much more character. Okay, now to finish these off and just take them to the next level, I have mixed up my homemade stain with the acrylic paint. I have a tutorial on how to do it. I'll put a link up above here and down in the description. You can get the recipe for that. So you just need to make your homemade stain, have a little bit of paper towel and a sponge, and apply it all over that board. After you've applied it all over the board, you're going to let it sit for about 1 minute, let it soak into the wood, and then you're going to take your paper towel and wipe off all the excess stain. And as you're wiping away, the stain will not stick to the latex paint, but it'll stick to the raw wood, and that gives you your two tones of color. So you can see why if you were using a chalk paint or an acrylic paint, when you're doing this step, it would also soak into that paint. Where the latex paint, it lays on top and it doesn't soak in as well. So that's how you achieve the two different looks. And I know if you're a real crafter, we all have hordes and hordes of acrylic paint from the dollar store. So you can get so creative with different color combinations. And I just love the saw marks in this one. It has so much character. And if you've put on your first coat of stain and it's not quite as dark as you wanted it to, you can always go over the board and do a second layer until you get the desired color. And if you wanted to get really creative, you could sand down after this step and put a third color on, and I'm sure you'd have some wonderful effects with that. I love to use these palette boards to make them into signs, but I did something a little bit different today with these, so make sure you stick through to the end and I'll show you what I created with them. I love taking new wood and making it vintage and old and chippy like it's been around for 100 years. I have all kinds of different painting techniques that you can check out after you've watched this one, where you can achieve different looks but still make new wood look old. So make sure you check out those different videos after you watch this one. And now to finish them off, I'm going to take my sander and sand them up and give them a little bit more of a rustic look. Now these boards are going to be outside, so I'm using my Varathane polyacrylic sealer for the outdoors. If you're going to have your project inside, you don't have to use the outdoor one, but because this is going to be out in the elements, I want to give it that extra seal. So I'm just going to put 2 coats over each board to seal them up really well. And when you put the polyacrylic on it, it just brings that grain of that wood out even more. Okay, I got them all done. They're all dried and we're ready to make my project. And I'm so happy with the way that they turned out, and I love all the colors that I used. And this is what I'm going to use them with. I found these at a yard sale. I think I picked them up for a couple dollars. The tops were rotten. I took them off. I love the base. I'm not touching them. I love the color. I love the chippy rusty. And I'm going to make them into plant stands. I cut the palette boards to size. 3 of them fit in perfect, so it was meant to be. What do you think? Do you like it? So next time you see a palette, grab it, cut out some boards, and try this technique. I found these fabulous candle lanterns in the dump. They were dirty, they were really sun bleached, but they were still in really good shape, and I knew I could perk them up and make them beautiful again. I'm going to take the handle off the one lantern. It just has a jump ring and I can just squeeze it apart and take it off. And I'm going to put some masking tape around that metal piece because I don't want it to get any spray paint on it. I've taken it outside and I'm just going to give it a light coat of white spray paint. I want to give it that sun bleached white color. Obviously, somebody didn't see the potential that these lanterns still had because they turned out beautiful just with a real light coat of spray paint and brought it back to life for free. The glass votive holder on the inside of the one lantern was still there, was not broken. I cleaned it up and put in a little tea light. And the other lantern, back in one of my older videos, I made some candles with a tuna tin can, and that's one of those, and it fit in there perfect. And look how gorgeous these are. Sun bleached kind of white look, much better than the before, and they're ready to put out on my patio. Second project is this old lantern that I found in the scrap metal bin. It's really rusty, but it has so much character and I want to preserve that rust. I don't want to paint it. So I'm taking my engine enamel and I'm going to give it a really good coat and seal in all that gorgeous rust. I love using the engine enamel for this type of a project. It seals it up really well so you can put it out in the elements, and you can find it at an automotive store, or you can also find it on Amazon. And I'll put the link down below in the description so you can check that out. The engine enamel that I bought has a bit of a gloss finish and it just made that rust pop. I love it. In one of my previous videos, I did some tin can upcycles and I made this tin can. I loved it and wasn't quite sure what to do with it. I know what to do with it today. I made a homemade napkin and decoupaged it on top of this tin can, and it fit in this lantern perfect. I added an ivy and it is going to look gorgeous on my front porch. I've taken this rusty, dull-looking lantern and made it into a beautiful piece of outdoor home decor. And I think the choice to save that rust color was the perfect one. I found this old birdhouse and it has definitely seen better days. The paint that was on it has completely disintegrated on it, and some of the nails were popped out, and it just needed some TLC, but it was still in good enough shape that I'm going to be able to fix it up. Just taking my hammer and just pushing in any of those nails that had started to pop out, and then I'm going to give it a really good sanding with an 80 grit sandpaper so it'll be ready to paint. I am loving this yellow paint. I love picking up these little testers too. It's just the right amount of paint for a couple projects. And I'm also loving this paintbrush from Zebra, the Palm Pro. It works fantastic to get in all those little nooks and crannies on your small projects. I love all of their paintbrushes, and they have different types for different projects. I'll put the link down below in the description, and you can head over to their website and check them out because it is a must for paintbrushes. I thought the blue was going to really complement the yellow, so I'm going to do a salt painting technique on the roof to give it a rustic kind of chippy look. I'm going to paint on the paint. This is just a regular latex paint, a sample that I bought at Home Depot, and I'm just painting it all over the roof. And then once I have that done, while the paint is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle on pickling salt. You can use any type of salt, but the pickling salt, I like the texture that it gives and the chippiness. It's just a nice coarse salt. And just sprinkle it right into that wet paint. Once everything's all dry, I'm taking it outside because it is messy, and I'm sanding it down with my 80 grit sandpaper. I think it turned out fantastic. I love the chippy feel, and I'm going to add some embellishments. I found this old door pull and this dresser drawer pull, and I'm going to add them onto the birdhouse just as some focal points. And that looks 100% better than that birdhouse that I found in the dump at the wood pile. I was able to upcycle it and make it pretty again, and it's ready for some renters. Now, this is a whole bunch of things that I found put together. This wire basket and this wooden trivet. I'm not sure what it was off of or where it was from. It's really sturdy and beautiful. I knew I wanted to use that in this project, and an old spindle off a table. I'm going to give the wire basket and the trivet a coat of black spray paint. I find sometimes when I find things, I just tuck them away, and it takes a while for me to get inspired and figure out what I want to do with them. And this is one of these projects. I had all three of these things tucked away, and it just all of a sudden came to me, and I put it together. I drilled a hole down the middle of the trivet, and I'm doing a little test hole in the bottom of the spindle, and I'm going to screw those two pieces together. I'm using these staple nails to put the basket on top of the spindle. It was a little tricky to get that hammer in and out of there, but I made it work, and I got it on there nice and sturdy. And I've created a beautiful planter with just junk. The wire basket, the spindle, and that trivet on the bottom, and it all pulled together beautifully. So that's why sometimes I can create these wonderful projects, because I don't throw anything out, because you never know when you're going to need it. Last project, we're going to upcycle this glass coffee jar and a solar light from the dollar store. I want to paint the glass jar, and the first step that I like to do when painting glass is to give it a light spray of primer, and then I had some of this accent stone spray paint. I wanted to give it a little bit of texture, and it works fantastic for that. I'm going to take the stake out of the bottom of the solar light, fill up that glass jar with some gravel from my driveway, get out my E6000, and put a little bit around the rim of that glass jar and just set the solar light into it. The weight of the gravel in the glass jar keeps it from tipping over, and I added some twine around the neck of it for embellishment, and once the sun goes down, the solar light will light up and it will look beautiful. I hope you've enjoyed my dump find upcycles that I've turned into beautiful outdoor decor. Today we are upcycling this cabinet. I actually found it in the dump, in the wood pile. Fantastic condition, solid pine. It's never had any stain or any paint on it. I'm gonna upcycle it, and I'm excited to show you guys how it's gonna turn out. The first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna wash this down with some soapy water and then let it dry really well. And then we're going to put on our base coat. Before we get started, let's take off all of the hardware and all of the hinges. I'm going to do a really chippy finish, kind of farmhouse kitchen. And when I'm doing my first coat, I always like to use my darkest color. That way when we distress it at the end, the dark color will be on the bottom and it just makes it look more authentic. And for this project, I'm going to be using the square paintbrush from Zebra. These are my favorite paintbrushes and they have so many to choose from for every different project. I'll put a link down below in the description so you can head to their website and check it out. I'm going to paint the entire cabinet inside and out with my homemade black chalk paint. I certainly have been on a roll finding fantastic pieces in the dump at the wood pile, and I'm happy because I can upcycle them and share them with you. When I'm painting furniture, I always like to paint the back of the projects also. I usually do it in the same color as the base coat, and I don't do any painting techniques or anything on it, but it just brings it all together nicely. The whole cabinet has one coat of that black homemade chalk paint over the entire piece. I'm going to do a couple different techniques on this. I'm going to do the Vaseline method and I'm going to do the hairspray crackle technique. Both of these techniques will create an aged, authentic, vintage looking finish on your furniture piece that you're doing. This is such an easy way to create chippy paint, just with some Vaseline. You apply it anywhere where that cabinet would have aged naturally, in the corners, around the legs, and you can put a lot on or a little on, depending on how chippy you want it. And then you just paint right over top of that Vaseline. I'm loving this yellow color. If you've been following along, you see that I practically am painting everything in this yellow color. I love it. When we're doing techniques like this and we want to create that chippy layered effect, you want to have 2 or 3 different colors. I had this turquoise paint that was given to me by a friend. She'd finished up with it. I grabbed it. I am just going to dab it here and there and let the yellow peek through in between and cover the whole cabinet. I know, just hang in there. I know it looks like an awful mess right now, but it's going to be beautiful when it's finished. So make sure you stick through to the end so you can see the end result. I'm also going to put some graphics on the front door that are going to be beautiful. And the next step is our hairspray technique. I love using this technique for creating just a fine crackle. This does not give the same kind of crackle as Elmer's glue. This is a little bit smaller, not as pronounced, and I think it just looks more authentic. So I've sprayed my whole piece with firm hairspray, and then I find it also works best if you're using acrylic paint. I didn't have any acrylic paint enough to do this project, so I'm using chalk paint. I'll get a little bit of crackling, but probably not as much as if I had have used acrylic, but we're still gonna get that aged vintage look. We're gonna spray on the hairspray, let it dry, and then paint on top of it, and then take the heat gun and dry it, and the crackles will appear. With all of these painting techniques, I'm trying to replicate what an old piece of furniture looks like after it's been aged over 100 years, or that old sign and that crackled and layered paint look. And with all these techniques, a lot of them I think I can get pretty close to making them look really authentic. Everything has been sprayed with hairspray and then painted and then completely dried, and then I just took a scraper and scraped all around the edges where that Vaseline was, and it just took it down to those other layers of color. Now this is a little trick too if you want to make it even look more authentic. I like using a stencil brush, dipping it in some water and then scrubbing into that paint, and it'll take it down to the next layer, and you can do it as big or as small of an area as you want, and it'll expose that paint underneath, and just look at how fantastic that looks, and it looks natural. Cabinet, it's completely painted. I love the way that it turned out. Now we're going to put some graphics on the front door. I've got 2 graphics that I designed, and I'm going to put them together so I can have the graphic down the whole door panel. I've put them in my Word program, I've sized them and made sure they fit on the door, and I'm using my Mod Podge reverse graphic transfer method. I have all kinds of full tutorials on my channel on how to do this step by step if you've never tried it before, but it's so versatile and it works fantastic. We're just applying the Mod Podge on each of the graphics, putting them down, making sure we've gotten all the bubbles and all the wrinkles out, and then we're going to set it aside and let it dry overnight. These graphics are available in my Etsy store. I'll put the link down below in the description so you can check it out. There's these graphics plus so many more. I've let these graphics sit overnight, and now I've just got a little dish of water with a little rag, and I'm just dampening that paper until you can just start to see the graphic show through, and then rubbing off the paper. This technique takes a little bit of practice, but once you get the hang of it, it's so much fun. Let's put some hardware on the door. It didn't have a handle, so I found this pole in my stash, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a patina. The turquoise paint that I used on the cabinet, I'm going to paint on the hardware and then wipe it off with a rag. You can also wipe it off with a baby wipe, and it'll just stay on all of the little nooks and crannies, and it'll give that patina look to the hardware. And once it's completely dry, I'm going to seal it all up with my engine enamel, and it'll make it really durable. And the cabinet is completely done, and I am in love with it. I think I was able to really replicate that chippy, layered, antique looking wood, and the graphics on the front turned out fabulous. Adding a little bit of a patina look to the hardware just took it to the next level. It's quite a transformation from that plain pine cabinet, had no character, to what I've created. So I'd love to know down in the comments what you think about my upcycle. It's a beautiful day here. The sun is shining, spring has come, and this is the first project on my to-do list. I saved this bench from the dump, and I'm excited to upcycle it. First of all, I love this paint color, and the chippiness and the way it has worn is fabulous. I don't want to change any of that. I want to keep all the paint that's there intact. I just want to freshen it up. It's not in perfect shape. It's really old, but the ornate legs on it and the sides of the bench are just fabulous. It needs a good cleaning, so I'm going to use some TSP and scrub it down and get all the little bits of dirt and loose paint off. This TSP is great. It'll remove any grease or grime or dirt. And I'm just going to use my scraper and just remove any loose bits of paint. It always amazes me what people just throw out because this bench had so much potential. Let me know in the comments if you would have saved this from the landfill. Now I'm just going to use this scuff pad instead of sandpaper because I don't want to take any of the paint off. I just want to remove any loose bits that are still there, and this works really well because it's a very fine grit. I have it all cleaned and prepped and sanded down, and I'm going to put on my homemade stain to bring out some of the wood grain. I want to leave as much as the original paint as I could, so the stain will make everything all pop, and that's what I'm going to do next. I'll put a link down below in the description and a link up top here of how you can make your own DIY stain. You can make it into any color, and it's so cheap and affordable and easy. And I'm just going to apply the stain over the whole bench, even over the existing paint, and then it's just going to freshen up that wood and bring out the grain and make it pop more. And the nice thing about this stain is you can layer it. You can put one layer on if you think that it's not maybe quite dark enough. You can mix up a little bit more and put more on until you get the desired color that you like. And I think it looks really great. It's really freshened up this wood, and it doesn't look so dried out and aged. After you've applied all the stain, you just take a rag and wipe off anywhere where it's still wet. And I thought this would look really cute with a nice quote on the front. I'm going to do my Mod Podge reversed graphic transfer technique to put these words on the front of the bench. I have a full tutorial with step-by-step instructions on how to do this technique. I'll put a link down below in the description and up here in the corner. Okay, this is dried completely, and I'm just going to take a damp rag and rub off that paper, and you're going to have the words left on the bench. I love using this technique. It's a great way to update furniture or your upcycled projects or to make wooden signs. And I'm enjoying being out in the sun and enjoying the warm weather and being able to get outside and do some upcycled projects that I've had stored away for the winter in my shed. Okay, and the graphics are all done, and I love the way they look on the front of this bench. If you're interested in purchasing these graphics, they're in my Etsy store. I'll put a link down below and up above. We're ready to put on the top coat. I'm putting on a Varathane outdoor polyacrylic sealer. This is going to go on my deck and it's going to be outside in the elements, so I want to make sure that it's sealed really well. So I'll probably put 2 or 3 coats on it and it'll be good to go. And there it is, all finished, and I'm so glad I was able to save it from the landfill. Once I put that top coat of the Varathane on it, it just made that yellow pop, and it looks fantastic. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this upcycled bench. I'm loving it. Today we're working on a dump find. I found this little table in the wood pile at the landfill. It's in kind of rough shape, but I know I can save it. It's just one of those cheap little tables and it all comes apart. And I'm gonna do some of my one-step paint and some gift wrap paper decoupage on it. Kind of gonna do a funky spin on it, so I'm excited to show you guys what I have in mind. So we got lots of work. Let's get started. This table has definitely seen better days. A lot of the finish has come off and it's loose. It needs to be tightened up once it's finished, but I know I can make it into something a lot better. This is a type of side table that all the legs and the spindles unscrew, so it actually makes it easier for painting. I can take it all apart and then lay it all out and paint it properly. When you see these tables out and about, don't overlook them. They're really easy to make pretty again. I took my 220 sanding block and I sanded it all down to get it all nice and smooth. And then I had some holes all around the outside of it. I think it had a ledge on it at one point. Filled it up with some wood filler, let it dry, and then I sanded that down and then took a baby wipe and wiped everything down clean so we have a nice surface to start on. This is the gift wrap paper that I'm going to use. I picked it up at the dollar store and I had this paint in my stash. I'm going to turn it into one-step paint, but look how it matches that gift wrap. It's going to come together perfectly. I've mixed up my one-step paint. If you missed that video, I'll put the link down in the description where you can watch that and get the recipe from there. It basically eliminates any prep to your surface or any top coat. It's all in one. It works fantastic, and wow, is it ever durable. If you want to paint a piece of furniture or cabinet doors, this is a recipe to use because it is really hard to distress afterwards. It's so hard. So if you're just going to do a solid color, this works perfect. Now I'm going to get painting these spindles. I have a little trick for painting spindles and it really speeds up the process. Also have a full tutorial there. I'll put that link down below in the description if you want to see some really fun spindles that I painted in some fabulous colors. You can check that out after. Basically, you're just putting on a rubber glove and then one of those spare socks that you've had laying around for forever, bring them out into your crafting area and use them to paint spindles. Dip your hand in the paint with the sock and just rub it on the spindles. These are probably going to take a couple coats. I'm going to let them dry completely in between before I add the next coat. And they're coming along perfect. I think they're still going to need one more coat. And I've got 2 coats on these 2 shelves. They look great, but they're going to need one more coat also. I've got 2 full coats on these spindles. It's covered really well, but I think I want to do one more coat and I'm going to sponge it on. I just have a little piece of sponge and I'm just dipping it in the paint and I'm just going to dab it up and down along that whole spindle and it's going to give it a nice smooth finish. And I'm also going to use that same process on those 2 shelves. This has got 2 coats on it already. I'd let it completely dry. And now I'm going to put my 3rd coat on with a sponge. It's going to get rid of any brush lines or any imperfections that you've had when you were painting it if you just dab that sponge up and down. My spindles are drying. I love this red. It is so fun and so whimsical. And it's always nice every once in a while to kind of venture out of that white and black and do something with a splash of color. Now we're going to get the gift wrap and we're going to cut a piece of it off the roll a little bit bigger than the top. We're going to Mod Podge it on with my matte finish and you're just going to brush it on. You don't want it too thick. If you have it thick, it's going to wrinkle up too much and bubble too much. You just want a thin coat, just enough to stick that wrapping paper onto the surface. One thing with decoupaging that you should always kind of keep in the back of your mind is you're never going to have a project that's 100% no wrinkles or no bubbles. It's virtually impossible. And I usually, when I'm doing projects like this, I embrace the wrinkles. I love it when they show up every once in a while because you can make it look distressed and old and it doesn't look like it's just a hunk of paper stuck on the top of your surface. Now I have added 2 coats of Mod Podge on top of that piece of wood. Let both of those coats dry completely. Now I'm going to take that gift wrap and place it exactly where I want on that piece of wood. The flowers, I kind of want to make sure they're centered up and are going to look nice when it's finished. And I'm putting a piece of parchment paper on top. Make sure it's parchment paper, not wax paper. Then we're going to iron it on. I have my iron set on the highest setting with no steam. And you're just going to take your time and just slowly just iron on that gift wrap. And as you're doing that, Mod Podge underneath will melt and adhere the paper to your project. I really love using the iron-on method to decoupage. It works really well when you're using it on a bigger project too. And the nice thing about using gift wrap paper is it comes in a bigger roll, so you can decoupage a bigger project. You're not limited to just using a piece of paper. That ironed on really well. Now I'm going to take my sanding block. This is a 80 grit sanding block and I'm just going to take it around the edges and just sand it. And as you do that, you're going to leave a really nice clean edge around your piece of wood. Now I'm going to take that sanding block across the top of that gift wrap paper. I just want to age it, kind of distress it so it doesn't look perfect. And as you can see, it did kind of wrinkle up quite a bit. I don't know if it was a different type of gift wrap paper, but I actually really like it. And as I'm sanding it, I'm liking it even more. It gives it a really distressed look. By sanding it, it knocks off that top edge of the wrinkles and leaves this beautiful distressed finish. I'm embracing the wrinkles on this one because I love the way that it turned out. I'm going to seal this up with engine enamel. This table will probably be used for a plant stand or a little end table, and I want it to be sealed really well and really be durable. This engine enamel is perfect for that. We are ready to put this dump fine table back together. And I'm going to put a couple coats of paint on the bottoms of those shelves. Someone else's trash is my treasure. I knew with a little bit of TLC and a little bit of patience, I could turn this into something beautiful again. And I love the bright color and the whimsical feel of it.